Damien was a fairly wealthy man. Back in high school, he was nicknamed the lawyer, but that was more from the fact that he always wore a black suit and red tie in all weathers. Was it winter or summer? Damien never wore anything else. It seemed like that suit was the only thing in his closet. But no, he just had 5 of these jackets and pants. What kind of ties? The choice was huge, from the usual basic black boatie to a red tie with flowers. Of course, Damien didn't become a lawyer, but that aristocratic remained in him forever. At a more mature age, around 30, he began collecting watches. What else is an independent man who has built a career on art to do? Yes, exactly, on art. It would seem that how can a person who knows culture and knows about paintings and books earn so much? But he can, and perfectly well. Damien was an example of this. Humanities are often undervalued by society, and for good reason. Art is much more complex than math and engineering. It's about feeling. If he had become a prosecutor or a lawyer, he would never have gotten that skill. But he made the right choice. He followed his heart. And while his classmates sweated at work in stuffy offices, he gave lectures, visited museums, conducted seminars, and then he became a famous movie critic. All these fields of activity, of course, over time began to bring him quite a large income. He bought a beautiful house outside the city, a house that was surrounded only by a forest of spruce trees. Those trees always soothed him. He found peace in the rustling of those branches, in the smell of the place, in the atmosphere itself. Often sitting by the fireplace and reading a book, he would look out his panoramic window, as if envying himself. It was indeed spectacular. With him sat his faithful dog of royal breed and quietly wagged his tail, putting his clever head on his master's knee and looking at the vastness, as if he too felt this power, the power of this place. It was really mystical, special. Sometimes you sit at the foot of a fir tree, look up, and there is an owl sitting there. Damien told his daughters about his impressions. It is a majestic and wise bird, and it looks at you, and you keep your eyes on. Are you afraid to scare it away? Or are you really communicating with this mysterious creature? Well, if you ask me, life in the city's a lot better. At least I haven't met any maniacs. Amy's youngest daughter laughed as she put a sugar cube in her cup of green tea. Oh, you've seen too many horror movies and now you're doing something crazy, the older daughter replied. Both daughters were in their early 20s, and Damien had turned 50 last month. He looked very solid for his age. Sometimes his daughters called him vintage dad. Damien laughed. It didn't embarrass him or make him angry. On the contrary, he liked growing up, gaining experience. He was getting better every year, just like the expensive French wine in his cellar. Well, Darcy, what's your opinion on that? Damien laughed in a businesslike manner. Cross your arms? About what? The older woman asked, finally sitting down at the table. She liked tea, but pouring it into each mug was torture, Darcy said. There are only 4 of us at the table, father, sister, myself and my husband. But my father and sister are my guests tonight, so it is my duty to be a proper hostess. Where would you like to live? Damien clarified his question without taking his daughter's serious gaze off him. I am comfortable here. The city is a place of opportunity for me. What I would do in the middle of nowhere, I don't know how to answer that either, Darcy said. Dad, I'm not you who reads a book, tells the world about it, and criticizes it, and get $50,000 for it. Damien, you're exaggerating, he laughed. Wait a minute, Amy. My main income comes from lectures to upperclassmen. And you've made a fortune off of them, she said sarcastically. Oh, please. What kind of fortune? Well, I bought a house in the woods. What of it? In fact, I'm just a professor who teaches cultural studies. Yeah, and you also do charity work. And also bought downtown apartments for my 2 daughters, laughed Darcy's husband, Matthew. You should do the same. Damien strongly recommended it. Alex and I go to the orphanages every week, by the way. You can't imagine how much clothing they accumulate after a theater performance. They re-stitch the costumes, and they make great clothes for the kids, Amy said. By the way, where's Alex? I haven't seen him in a while. Where's my brother-in-law? Damien faked indignation. Dad, stop it, Amy shushed him. First of all, he's not your son-in-law. And second of all, I told you at the beginning that he was sick and couldn't make it. I wasn't at the beginning. I was late. You know the traffic on Friday nights, Damien replied. Yeah, the traffic called the flower shop, Darcy grinned, nodding at the 3 bouquets and vases her father had given her. Damien was even embarrassed, but he didn't show it, just laughed with everyone else. He loved his daughters more than life. They were the only reminder of his deceased wife, Sandra. How much they were like that beautiful woman, just as kind and helpful, beautiful, and at the same time incredibly sweet. Damien tried to do everything for them. He thought it was his duty as a father, provided them with apartments, always offered them money, but the girls refused. They wanted to achieve everything honestly, by their own labor, and their father understood them. He was very proud of his daughters, who were so eager for independence. A few minutes passed and Damien broke the silence again. When am I going to have grandchildren? Everyone almost choked on their tea, and then laughed out loud. Dad, you're a joker today. Are you going to be a comedian? Said Amy, laughing out loud. You almost choked us with tea. Why? Don't you want to give me heirs? Damien persisted. Dad, we are your heirs, Darcy replied. I don't think it's too early to think about grandchildren. They just turned 23. She's a girl like me. Yes, my dears, you're right, Damien said a little sadly. By the end of the tea party, he very rarely spent time with his family. They were all busy setting up their own families now. Damien looked at the happy married couple. Darcy and Matthew looked at Amy, who was smiling, looking at the screen of her phone. Surely her lover must be texting her. And Damien thought to himself with some vague regret at how lonely and maybe even miserable he was. Those thoughts haunted him all the way back to the mansion. He was met by his only true friend, a dog named Fred, who was already 3 years old. If you counted by human years, he was about 21. What, a young man in the prime of his life, Damien thought, and sat down by his favorite fireplace. Fred sat down next to him. I guess it's our fate to be lonely, Damien said. You want a girlfriend, don't you? I'm sorry, friend, but I don't want puppies. Well, they're all over the shelters as it is. We don't need any more poor little dogs in the world. Save these poor things. Remembering the shelters, Damien went to the round table and found a letter from the New Life Dog Shelter. Just recently, Damien had donated $100,000 to this shelter. It wasn't a small amount of money, but it was better than nothing. Damien was not a greedy man. He just liked to distribute his income properly, and he divided the money among many organizations. The letter read, Dear Damien, we are very grateful for such a great contribution to our homeless animal shelter. We want to express our gratitude to you, and as a presentation we are sending you a collar. It's very durable. You're durable. Definitely be well taken care of. The envelope did indeed contain a spike collar. Damien took it out and laughed. Do you realize they think I'm really going to spike you? He showed the collar to the dog, while the dog sniffed the object with interest. They are so used to restricting the freedom of animals, and all they need is clean air and enough freedom to do what they want, Damien reasoned. He sighed sadly, sat down on the couch, and began to prepare his paper, which he would present at the lecture the following week. He sent out invitations to all his acquaintances, family, relatives, and his students. The lecture was at the Museum of Modern Art. Damien had to get up almost at 5 in the morning, so as not to be late for his own performance. Of course, he wasn't the only one speaking there. Various critics, lecturers, professors, writers, art historians, and other speakers came from all over the city. Damien often felt uncomfortable in such company, but today he tried to fight his embarrassment. He was a professor, after all, and his thoughts have the right to be spoken along with the others. Good afternoon, Damien, shouted one of his students somewhere in the opposite corner of the hall. She ran towards him with a face that had a smile up to her ears. Damien really set this girl apart from the rest of his students. Not only was she great at art, but her looks were amazing. She looked like an elf. White as snow, straight hair, and slightly pointed ear tips. Her very face was very refined, and the professor, although he was not a follower of mass culture, could not help but remember the movie The Hobbit. After all, that's exactly how the eternally young, beautiful elves were portrayed there. Good afternoon, Sandra. Damien smiled. What can I do for you? The lecture starts in half an hour. I just wanted to ask you when you have a seminar with my group, Sandra asked. Honestly, I haven't thought about it yet. I don't think I'll be able to make it to class on Wednesday, but you can definitely wait for next week. And by the way, warn the others that the test is coming up. The girl almost glowed with happiness. Damien's exams were always a lot of fun. It wasn't the usual class where the teacher called the students to the blackboard as if they were being executed. No, it was completely different. They sat in a circle so they could see each other's eyes, and everyone answered the questions in order. And in the spring, these exams were held outside in the fresh air. What could be more beautiful? Sandra loved Damien's lessons. This teacher really had something to say, and the girl got into his every word. I am very honored by this attention, Damien admitted, and almost bowed. Sandra was indeed his favorite student. Damien had high hopes for her. She was very capable and hardworking, doing all the reports. Often she brought some interesting materials to study just for fun, and she and her classmates would take them apart in class. It wasn't just a faculty, it was a dream, and it was all thanks to Damien. Sandra jumped with joy and ran towards the stage. Damien also took his time walking that way, looking at the paintings of beautiful modern artists. He used to not understand their style, their language, but one day he decided to attend one sensational lecture, which turned his conservative idea of art upside down. From then on, he began to visit such exhibitions more often. He liked the concepts themselves, the language of the creators. They express their feelings through strange figures or compositions. Many people do not understand modern art, but if you understand art as feelings, with the help of which the author expresses himself. Can feelings be subjected to the laws of logic? No, it's impossible. Our feelings are confusion, impulsiveness, chaos. It's an explosion of emotions, a firework, an avalanche, a torrent. That's what real art is. No, it absolutely did not mean that Damien stopped being fascinated by classical works and started watching only modern dramas and reading books of this century. Damien still preferred Shakespeare to everything in the world and adored Pushkin. But time is passing. Art and culture take on a whole new color. And to conform to the new time, one must accept its basic laws and genres. It is in our age that art is free. People express themselves with the help of strange at first glance objects, draw incomprehensible pictures, make sculptures incomprehensible to the masses, but all this really shows what a big step culture has made by the standards of mankind. People are not restricted by the limits of their previous existence. They do and create what they want, what they feel. This was inspiring to Damien, and it was in this lecture that he was going to tell everyone about contemporary art and its impact on people. And now welcome the legendary movie critic, literary critic, journalist, writer, and of course, philanthropist Damien, announced the host. Damien came on stage with a smile, adjusted his tie, coughed into the microphone, and took out his works. There were about 30 pieces of worksheets. Damien hoped he would be understood and supported. He was a little apprehensive. The other professors who had spoken before him had talked about timeless classics, about the importance of preserving history, and now he would break all the foundations and tell everyone the truth, or rather, what the future of mankind is striving for, in his opinion. So he began confidently. Many of you in this room probably know me as a literary critic as well as an art critic. Well, today I want to talk about art, specifically about its contemporary direction. There were sighs and muffled exclamations in the hall. The reactions were quite different, but Damien noticed one pattern. Mostly teenagers and students were happy about the topic. In general, the younger generation, quite older or even elderly people, contorted their faces in anticipation of something unusual. Of course, Damien was a bit tense about this reaction of the older generation. After all, they were the ones who were now at the helm. And if Damien said something wrong, he would quickly be judged and suspended. His heartbeat increased noticeably, but he decided to continue. Modern art is something marvelous and beautiful. It reflects our society, our thoughts, our feelings. It is a broad concept that encompasses various forms of creativity, from painting and sculpture to installations and performances. Artists use new materials, techniques, and ideas to express their thoughts, emotions. Damien hesitated for a few seconds, but he saw Sandra's gaze shining with support. She seemed about to soar with delight. She really liked Damien's speech. Modern art is also often controversial because its meaning and purpose are not always clear, he continued with a smile. However, that is where its value lies, its ability to provoke dialogue and reflection. Often works of contemporary art offer the viewer new views on the world, evoke emotions, and make them think. It is important to realize that contemporary art does not have to appeal to everyone. It is meant to evoke different reactions and emotions, as well as to open new horizons for understanding and perceiving the world. That is why we are here now, in this museum. Here very young talents show what their thoughts and feelings are capable of, what they themselves are capable of. I think it would be useful for all of you to study at least a few paintings, installations, sculptures. Yes, at first glance you may think that it makes no sense at all, and the artist obviously smoked something before creating this masterpiece. Laughter erupted in the audience. But look closely, Damien continued, pleased with the first lively reaction. Once you remove your preconceptions about contemporary art, once you feel what the author of a particular work wanted to say, only then can you understand yourself. Damien talked for a long time and finally finished. At first there was applause, and then whispers were heard in the hall, quickly turning into loud cheers. I hope that I have helped you a little to see contemporary art in a new way, he said. Once again, I insist that you examine the works in this museum. May each of you discover something new in contemporary art. May we be prepared to reflect on its meaning and impact on our lives. It will definitely be useful for you. Thank you for your attention. If you have any questions or want to discuss this topic in more detail, I will be happy to help. Once again, the room began a vibrant discussion of the words we had just heard. Damien really struck a chord with many. Many visitors began to approach the paintings, sculptures to study them not superficially, but in more detail. Damien was glad that many people were influenced by his words and had a positive reaction. Of course, there were some grumpy old men who immediately left the building after this mini lecture, but that didn't really upset Damien. The main thing was that he had conveyed his thoughts to the general public, and the reporters who filmed all of his speeches would probably post it on social media, which would create even more coverage. Damien came down from the stage and was immediately approached by 3 girls who asked for his autograph. Of course, he didn't turn them down. He realized that it's not every day you can meet someone who is 15 years older than them, but understands their whole life, understands what they live, and what art means to them. Damien noticed a girl not far away who was looking at a painting. She seemed genuinely interested. She was wearing a light, airy white dress with a wide ribbon around her waist. She looked very graceful. Her ponytail, which was made with a hairpin, completed this airy look. Damien just couldn't help but approach this thoughtful lady. He approached her very quietly and stood at her side, from which the girl, when she turned her head, flinched in surprise. "Oh, excuse me, please," the mysterious stranger stammered. Damien's smile never left his face. He thought he looked like a maniac, but he just couldn't take his eyes off this marvelous creature. "I'm sorry I startled you," he said. "It just seemed to me that you were trying very long and hard to understand this picture." "Yes, after listening to your lecture, I really wanted to take a closer look at these colors and strokes. You inspired me," you might say. The girl smiled. "Well, let me explain the meaning of this masterpiece, which is simply not yet accepted as such," said Damien. "I would be all for it." "My name is Damien." He extended his manly hand to this fragile angel. The girl was embarrassed and hid her smile behind the book she was clutching to her chest. Elise, the stranger, finally introduced herself and shook his hand lightly. "What have you got there, Jane Austen?" Damien asked, looking at the book Elise held in her hands. "Yes, I love such novels, romantic, but at the same time, very deep philosophy. It's all about knowing where to dig," she said. "Well, that's commendable," the man smiled. "But let's get back to the painting. This picture was painted by a rather famous artist, Jenny Samuels. Initially, you probably completely missed the meaning of those gray blotches and colors. Samuels is known for her gray hues and abstract style. She creates a sense of haziness and mystery. In this painting, you can see the different shades of gray that create a sense of depth and mystery. I am amazed by you." Damien marveled. It's the first time I've seen someone describe a painting in such detail based on both their own feelings and those of the author. "Really? I thought everyone did that." Elise grinned. "You gave me a whole lecture yourself." "There's an overwhelming sense of unease when you look at it," she continued. "I think gray shades can symbolize uncertainty, melancholy, or sadness, but everyone can perceive this picture differently, depending on their own associations and emotional state. Is that what you feel when you look at it?" "Well, I feel very uncomfortable," Damien admitted. "I feel like the author was depressed at the time she painted it, and deeply depressed. Although I find something in common with her emotional state. I think I even understand her." This red color, Elise pointed to the right corner. "It is a kind of anger, and all the gray colors represent a depressive state. It's as if the artist rarely has any emotion at all. Everything is gray, lifeless. Perhaps this life has become so ordinary for her that she's become unbearably bored." "I'm liking you more and more," Damien admitted aloud, and almost collapsed on the floor with embarrassment. He definitely hadn't meant to say that out loud. "I'm a professional editor with a degree in philology and 20 years of experience." He noticed Liz's embarrassment as well. She clearly hadn't expected that from a stranger either. "Well, it was nice to meet you," Damien tried to end the conversation as quickly as possible. "Maybe we'll see each other again. At some of the exhibitions. Though I don't go to them that often. Today was the only one I've been to in 6 months. I'm looking forward to seeing you again." "You're a very interesting person," Liz said. She shook the man's hand and left for another room. They never crossed paths again. A month passed. The meeting had completely slipped Damien's mind. He had already forgotten their conversation, but now he was invited to the exhibition again, but as an ordinary guest, albeit with some additional opportunities. For example, he could enter the halls where other visitors were forbidden to enter. Damien decided to go there with his family. It wasn't uncommon to get out somewhere, and this was a great chance to spend time together. The only one who couldn't join was Emily. She had gone into the hospital when her boyfriend passed on his illness, and she was sorry. "Honey's getting better," Damien said into the receiver of the phone and dropped the call. It was very hurtful, but there was nothing that could be done. Health was always more important. Darcy and her husband showed up for the meeting. They were all in formal suits. Such handsome, businesslike people. Darcy had done a dazzling hairdo. So many visitors turned around to get a closer look at the beauty. This time the show was held in one of their state's historic homes. As Damien liked to talk about the land Damien lived in, he even joked, "I wish I had a companion to dance at the ball." Of course, there were no balls in the former Noble Assembly. They don't organize balls nowadays. As last time, everyone came to see the paintings of modern artists. "It's a very strange piece of work, don't you think?" Darcy asked her father, coming up behind him. She took another sip of champagne and waited for his answer. Life is so inconceivable sometimes. It seems like only a month ago he was praising modern artists who brought something completely new to our world. But seeing it honestly makes me want to cry. What was he trying to say with those delicious cakes? Damien said. It was a very strange sculpture indeed. There were donuts with different colored icing glued to the mirror, white, black, and pink. Each one had teeth marks on it. One had the edge bitten off. Nothing else had been made or written here. Damien completely failed to understand the meaning of this masterpiece. "Oh, I see you two like my installation. I'm very flattered, because it took me a month to come up with the idea," said the thin young man, whose gait was more like a lady's. "A month?" Darcy shouted in surprise, and she shut her mouth as she saw the displeased look in the artist's eyes. "Yes, a month," he repeated haughtily. "Let me show you." He nonchalantly pushed Damien and Darcy aside and stood as close to the mirror as he could. Now he began. "This installation is called Stop Eating." Damien and Darcy looked at each other. They were trying hard not to laugh, but their smiles were definitely visible. "May I ask," Damien said, holding back a laugh, "why did you choose such a vulgar name?" "Oh, it makes an impression and makes you think." But he pondered, "Don't distract me. So where was I?" "Oh yes, my concept. It's simpler than it sounds at first glance. It's a protest against the toxic consumption of unhealthy products," the artist said and stopped talking, as if he was waiting for a reaction, but the audience didn't react. "I don't understand at all what you're talking about." "Excuse me, what toxic consumption?" Damien asked. "Why are you people so shallow?" "All right, I'll explain it to you on my fingers," the artist sighed. "Let's start with the fact that our age is the age of consumption. People buy goods, food, in fact, absolutely everything, and then they throw it all in the trash. They pollute our nature and ecology. People today are really selfish, but that's not the point at all. I decided to look at the statistics of obesity in the world and was simply horrified when I saw the figures. Right now, 33% of our planet is already overweight, and if this isn't stopped, the numbers are only going to get bigger." "So how does your installation combat this problem?" Darcy asked. "See the donuts in the mirror? It's an addiction to sweets. To lose weight, you have to stop eating those sweets. But people decide how much weight they're comfortable with," Damien objected. "No, what's wrong with that?" The creator exploded. "The more they eat buns, the more they consume. It's all bad for our ecology." "But how will your painting help to combat this problem?" Damien asked. "People will look at it and realize what a terrible mistake they are making. They will realize when they look first at the donuts and then at the mirror." "But how are they going to realize that when even you've been explaining this installation to us for 15 minutes? Darcy wondered. "Why don't you write an explanatory note here, leave some guidelines?"
Yes, Damien had already begun to mock the poor young man, but he was not offended, but rather angry. It seemed like he was about to turn around and smash that mirror to pieces. It soon became clear that he really meant to do so, for he had already taken a swing. Emily rushed to stop the unhappy artist, but a girl who Damien hadn't expected to be here came to the rescue. It was Liz.
"Robert," she shouted and took the insane man by the arm. "Calm down, calm down." The words really seemed to have an effect on him. He, breathing heavily, stepped away from his masterpiece, frantically rotating his eyes. "What's wrong? What are you doing?" Liz asked him sternly. "Those two insulted my work," he cried. Damien certainly didn't think artists were so sensitive. He felt very ashamed, though he rather felt pity for the man. "We didn't do anything like that," Darcy said indignantly. "We were just talking, and he, I'm sorry, I don't know his name, acted like a child. What kind of circus have I come to?" "Liz? Do you two know each other?" Damien was surprised. "Yes. This is a good friend of mine," replied the girl, embarrassed. "Dad, who's Liz? Who is this?" Darcy whispered angrily in her father's ear. He was blushing more and more, but he didn't lose his senses. "Yes, this is Liz," he introduced his acquaintance. "I met her at an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art about a month ago."
"Liz, I'd like you to meet her. This is my daughter Darcy," he addressed her.
Darcy had no choice but to smile and shake her hand.
"I'm very glad to hear that my father has a friend who also likes art. My age," she added casually, but everyone took the hint. Damien gave Darcy an angry glance, then walked over to Liz.
"I apologize," he said to Robert. "I shouldn't have tortured you like that. We were only curious. We didn't mean to hurt you." The young man gave Damien a haughty look and then walked away, catching his shoulder. "I'm sorry to have caused such a commotion," he said to Liz. She smiled embarrassedly, then said, "It's good to see you again. I didn't expect to meet you again, and again at such an interesting exhibition." "Oh, yes," Damien laughed. "I'm here with my family." He glanced around to show Darcy and Matthew, but they had disappeared somewhere. He just shrugged and went back to his dialogue with this lovely girl. "What do you think of this work, Robert?" Damien asked as they strolled slowly down the hall. "I think it's overrated." "It's a masterpiece, no doubt, but there's nothing unusual about that smile. You see, people are always trying to find a clue when there's no clue. They're looking for a miracle in the ordinary for some reason. But I think Da Vinci is a genius," said Liz. "You see, it's not her smile that's the mystery, it's the look in her eyes. Leonardo, I think, was the first person who could make a smile with his eyes, not with his lips. It's like he put his soul into it. Those eyes seem to glow." "I didn't expect to hear you speak like that." "Very surprised," Damien replied. "Most importantly, I think exactly the same thing. You're so smart. Let me ask you an indiscreet question. How old are you?"
"I'm 26, Liz replied with a smile.
This answer did not embarrass Damien at all. He had expected something like that. Liz was very young, but she thought like a very wise person who had seen a lot. This seemed like something unbelievable. "Look at them," Darcy whispered to her husband. They were standing in a remote corner of the room, watching everyone like maniacs. Darcy stood businesslike, but already more relaxed. The alcohol had finally taken its toll on her, but she kept drinking. This champagne is delicious. What are they discussing now? I don't think it's the mysteries of art or the meaning of life, she said wryly. Do you want to come closer and have a look? Matthew replied. Darcy looked at Matthew indignantly. Are you stupid? What closer? What we'll see. But you wanted to, didn't you? God, I'm just speaking figuratively. Darcy was angry. I don't like this. And Liz is too weak and clearly has a superficial view of people. You know, I know people like that. A pretty girl like that can't know about art. She just wants to make money. So she thinks about where to put her pretty face. What are you getting so attached to her for? You don't even know her. Matthew replied. Maybe this girl is really interested in paintings. Maybe she's an artist herself. You don't know. There's no need to know. Darcy rolled her eyes, then pointed her finger gently at the girl with white hair. She was dressed in strange clothes. Everything seemed to be made of leaves, and her head was covered with intertwined tree branches. It was as if she was the embodiment of nature in a human body. See, that's really an artist. That's a really creative person. Now look at her. Darcy nodded toward Liz. Skin and bones. She's probably anorexic too. Maybe you're just jealous, Matthew remarked. I don't see anything wrong with that girl. Jealous? Matthew, don't you understand? She turned away from her husband and went back to watching Damien and Liz. They were looking at a large painting on the entire wall. Darcy nervously twirled her glass in her hands. She certainly didn't like what she was seeing. What if she wants my father's money? Darcy thought with horror. Exactly. She wants to seduce him and then take his inheritance. She's a con artist. I'll go and expose her right away. Matthew didn't have time to stop his wife. She rushed toward Damien and Liz at the speed of light. As soon as she got there, she tugged on the poor girl's shoulder. She gasped in surprise. Her eyes were filled with indignation and fear. I'm sorry, Liz said. I won't forgive you, you little bitch. Get away from my father, Darcy shouted. What? Liz was outraged, raising her voice. How dare you? Liz shoved Darcy, causing her to stagger, unable to keep her balance because of the alcohol she had drunk. Darcy collapsed and something crunched under her. There was the sound of breaking glass. Darcy looked at her arm. It was covered in blood. There were shards of glass on the floor. Her palm was literally embedded in the shards, but she felt no pain. Oh my God, a woman's voice shouted from behind her. A crowd began to gather around Darcy. But the girl wasn't going to stop. She was so enraged that she lunged at Liz. Both collapsed to the floor and began to fight. Damien tried to pull the fighting girls apart, but it was no use. Nails and glass shards were used. Then Darcy grabbed Liz's hair and pulled it, causing her to scream in pain. Somebody make it stop. Security? People shouted. 2 pumped-up guards in black uniforms arrived only a few minutes later. They managed to pull the 2 angry girls apart. Darcy was held by Damien, and Liz, who was nearly unconscious, was supported by a guard. Liz's throat was covered in scratches, some of the shards even embedded in her delicate skin. As soon as Damien saw this, he immediately abandoned Darcy and ran up to Liz. Darcy grabbed Matthew in an arm and began to calm her down. She didn't want to keep fighting. Ambulance. Call an ambulance, Damien shouted, examining Liz's neck. A few minutes later, the poor girl was taken to the hospital. All the guests saw her off, standing on the porch in plaids. It was already getting colder, so it was impossible to stand outside for long. Damien sighed heavily and walked back into the building. There, police officers were questioning Darcy. Matthew stood next to Darcy and said that she was in no condition to say anything. She was drunk. Damien was ashamed and disgusted to even go near his daughter. He walked through the shards and saw some woman sitting on her knees crying. It seemed to be the same place where Darcy had fallen. What's your emergency? Damien leaned sympathetically toward the poor woman. She looked up at him with tear-stained eyes. My sculpture. It took me 2 years to make, she sobbed. Damien could see why it had caused such a reaction. It was her creation, and now it was bound to be ruined, barbarically destroyed. Destroyed, screamed the artist, clutching a shard of her sculpture in her hands. Damien sat down next to her. May I ask what it was? He asked gently. I was making a meaningful copy of David. I just added some of my own details to it, overplayed the image a little. But there's no point in talking about it now. It's all gone. It hurts like hell. I understand, Damien said. You know, I'm an art historian by trade. I'm often invited to watch the restoration of really old objects, dishes, sculptures, books. And then one day, the restoration department burned down. You may have heard on the news, many things were saved, but I had one favorite book. I loved to look at the cover, even though I didn't know the contents or the author. So, when everything in that department burned down, I went to identify some items and saw that very cover on the floor. All the pages of that book had burned, but my cover remained. You see, I wasn't allowed to take it with me, but they promised that they would display it in the museum. What's my point? Even an artifact that has lost its historical value can be important to us. Something will definitely be left of it. And even if this cover burned, I wouldn't grieve, because I still have the memory of it. I put a part of my soul into it, even though I was not even the creator. The woman listened to him very carefully and seemed to understand what he was saying. She gripped the shard of her sculpture even tighter. "Keep this piece," Damien said. "It will remind you of your work, of the feelings you had when you created it. Yes, your personal David may be lost, but you still have your most precious possession, feelings and memories, emotions. Isn't that the point of art, to leave something in your soul? Some kind of imprint on your memory. No one else will ever see it. I'm sure that you didn't originally set out to impress anyone. You were doing it for yourself first. You wanted to pour your feelings out somewhere, and creativity has served you well. Even in this shard, your energy remains." "God," the woman whispered. "Please tell me your name." Damien grinned. "My name is Damien," he admitted. "Damien," the woman continued to whisper. "You just opened my eyes," the woman said. "I feel no pain at all. I wanted to kill myself 5 minutes ago. Wouldn't you like to be a psychologist?" "No," Damien replied. "My calling is art." The artist cried and threw herself into his arms. He smiled, stroked her back, and comforted her as best he could, and it seemed to work. After half an hour, the police realized they weren't going to get anything out of Darcy and released her and her husband Matthew. Matthew shook Damien's hand and promised to take Darcy home safe and sound. Damien had no doubt that he would. It was Matthew after all. He still hadn't followed her today, though. Damien approached the police officers. They gave him a leering look and then asked, "Are you a witness?" "I'm the father of the girl who caused all this commotion," Damien answered. "Can you tell me more about what happened? The cameras don't explain much." "Well, it's going to be a little difficult, but I'll give it a try," Damien began. "The thing is, my daughter didn't like the woman I was talking to. I think it was the alcohol, though. Darcy always does terrible things under its influence. Why was she drinking so much of it? She wanted a distraction. Apparently her husband didn't keep track of how much she was drinking. It was a terrible situation. My friend Lisa is now in the hospital. That night ruined things with this girl, too, I think." "Are you aware that you will now have to sue that lady over there?" the policewoman asked. Damien followed her hand with his gaze and saw the very artist he'd calmed down a few minutes ago. She was looking at him with a smile. "I think we can settle this out of court," Damien summarized, smiling back. "Well, we hope so, too. You're better off, but you'll still have to pay moral compensation to all the guests tonight." "No problem." "How much?" The officer was a little puzzled by the question. She obviously didn't expect Damien to offer money right away. "They'll find out later," the woman explained. "You're free for today. Thank you for the information. Do you need a ride?" "I'm good. Thank you. I drove my car here." They said goodbye, and Damien left the building. The car was parked nearby, but the man had to walk through the entire park before reaching his transportation. At first he had planned to drive home to get some proper rest. This evening had clearly not gone according to plan. Damien hadn't expected to see Liz there as well, and certainly hadn't thought events would unfold this way. He started the car, but he wasn't going to his house. His destination now was the city hospital. That's where the ambulance had taken poor Liz. "Good evening. Could you tell me which room Liz is in, please?" "Just Liz." He smiled at the young woman at the information desk. Damien realized only now that he didn't know her last name or her first name. "Liz who?" "Give me the last name," said the tired, monotone voice. This shift had obviously been very hard on her. "Honestly, I don't remember the last name. It's a friend of mine. I just wanted to know if she was okay. I'm sorry, we don't allow outsiders." Damien smiled sadly and stepped aside. He decided to wait for a while, in case Liz came out here. At least Damien really hoped so. But half an hour passed, an hour no one came out. Only the nurse behind the counter looked at him suspiciously.
Soon Damien was tired. It was already 23 on the clock. He realized that no Liz was coming out, and after wishing the nurse on duty a good night, he left the hospital. As he passed through the gate, he saw a poor grandmother begging for alms. Of course, Damien had a very kind heart and a huge soul, so he handed her a large bill. Granny's eyes went to her forehead. All day long she had collected some pennies in that plastic cup.
And now she's being handed a large bill. Damien was about to leave, but Grandma called out to him. "Blue," she shouted, barely catching up with him. She handed him the money back. Damien looked at her with complete incomprehension. "Honey, I don't need that kind of money. I'll get mugged." "Thank you, but it's too much," Grandma said. "Grandma, please take it." "I'm not forcing you to do anything. I just wanted to help you," Damien replied. But the old woman just shook her head from side to side. I'm sure she wanted to take the bill and spend the money, but it was as if something was stopping her. Was it moral principles or fear for her life? It didn't matter. The bottom line was the poor grandmother returned the money. Then Damien found a solution to the problem. He took his wallet out of his pocket and pulled out a few smaller bills. "Here, please. Don't refuse at least this," he said, handing the old woman the small bills. Now the grandmother did not have to be persuaded for a long time. She took the money and immediately hid it in a secret pocket of her skirt. Gratitude shone in her eyes. Then she crossed herself. "Damien, God bless you, sweetheart. God give you happiness," she exclaimed. Tears of joy flowed from her eyes. "Can I give you a ride?" "I've got a car nearby," Damien suggested. "No, thanks, honey. There are kind people here, too. The orderlies let me sleep in their back room. Sometimes I help them with the cleaning. I say a prayer service at the hospital church for good health. I'll read one for you, too, darling. There is mercy in this world, after all," said Grandma. She mumbled and crossed herself for a long time, but Damien was already gone. He smiled as he headed for the car. Damien was very thoughtful. He was very concerned about Liz's condition. He hadn't even seen her, and the last thing he had seen was her horribly mangled neck. He hoped the girl was all right and on the mend. Damien was terribly angry at his daughter Darcy. What she had done was very reckless, childish. She wasn't a teenager, but she'd done something so stupid and hurt so many people. The poor woman who had her sculpture broken. People who couldn't enjoy that beautiful evening surrounded by paintings and works of art. What if someone had a date going on there, and now it was irrevocably ruined? Where she could have ruined someone's fate. She could have irreparably injured Liz, too. She could have taken a wrong turn, and the doctor should have helped her. And how many shards of glass were in her neck? Damien almost wanted to hit his daughter. He even had the thought of turning around and driving to her house to have a serious talk with her. He seriously considered suing her. Then he remembered that this was his daughter. Whatever she is, she's his own blood. He has to protect her, even when she commits such horrors. Damien didn't understand what Darcy disliked so much. Why had she decided to lash out at poor Liz? After all, they hadn't even really known each other, just shook hands. That was the end of their acquaintance. Why was Darcy so angry? She was always reasonable. She did what was right in her conscience. Something strange happened to her today. No more alcohol. Damien decided to talk to Matthew about it when he visited them again, and if Darcy would even be able to have her father visit now. After all, she would surely be ashamed. At least he hoped so. But all his hopes were in vain. The next day, after a terrible hangover, Darcy sat in the kitchen drinking water in glasses. But when would that headache subside? She moaned all day, suffering from a headache that was accompanied by a buzzing in her legs and arms. There were many bruises on her body. "That's a lesson for you," Matthew noted quietly. He was clearly annoyed. His wife's behavior had affected his reputation a great deal, or rather it would. It would probably be in the news, and his colleagues would create rumors about it. He'll definitely lose his bonus. "What's the lesson, Matthew?" Darcy said, putting a piece of ice and gauze to her temple. "I'm 27 years old, and I don't need life to teach me lessons." "No, but you're acting exactly 17, Matthew replied. "Though even teenagers didn't stoop to the kind of behavior you're stooping to. I just grabbed that bag off my dad's shoulder. Didn't you see her making a move on him?" Matthew couldn't stand it any longer and pounded his fist on the table, causing the cutlery to fly upward. Darcy immediately stopped talking and held her breath. She was feeling real fear now. She really felt like a teenager being reprimanded by her father. "I spent half an hour trying to prove to the police that you were under the influence of alcohol, and now you're claiming it was all deliberate. Why are you so aggressive, Darcy? Why are you so violent?" Damien was outraged. "Yes, Darcy, I am. You attacked a poor, defenseless girl at a cultural event, clawing at her neck, throwing splinters at her. You don't think that's cruel?" he yelled. "Okay, I admit it. There's a lot I don't remember. I may have done some things unconsciously drunk, but the motive was dictated by my mind, not alcohol. I knew what I was doing," Darcy replied. "Did you want to kill her?" "I don't understand," Matthew shouted. "No, just to teach her a lesson. Let her know who she's messing with. She is not worthy of my father." "Jesus, Darcy," Damien shouted. "Do you hear yourself? Where did you even get the idea that she wants your father for money?" "God, I'm just shocked at you. They were just discussing the exhibition, that's all." He said himself he was seeing her for the second time in his life. "Matthew, don't understand," Darcy interrupted him. "No, I don't want your explanation for what you did. There is no excuse. It was bloody awful. I've never seen you in such a state in my life. I don't think I've ever known you. You see, you're lucky. You've never seen me angry. Isn't that wonderful?" Darcy replied sarcastically. Matthew didn't answer anything. He only looked at his wife with a detached and disappointed look. But then he grabbed his coat and left the house. "Matthew, wait. Where are you going?" Darcy shouted after him, trying to catch up, but he had already called the elevator and left. He wanted to be alone. Or rather, he wanted to discuss last night's situation with a more sensible person. "Damien, are you home today? I wanted to stop by," Matthew said into the phone. He'd already called Damien while he was driving, because he knew that the man was always at home that day. He was either working or resting after his work days. "Hey, Matthew. No, I'm not home today. I'm sorry." Things came up, Damien replied. "Business? What kind of business?" After a moment's silence, Damien confessed. "Come to the city hospital. I'm here." Then the man hung up. Matthew was very surprised by this turn and stopped the car right on the highway. 3 cars honked at him from behind, and one driver even shouted a foul word out the window. Matthew took a moment to catch his breath and then turned around and drove back into town. "Hello, Damien." Matthew said hello as he flew into the waiting room. Damien even jumped with surprise. He was quietly reading a magazine like everyone else in the room, and then Matthew burst in. "Hi, Matthew," Damien smiled. "Have a seat." Matthew sat down next to him without a second thought and waited to see what Damien would say, but the man remained silent. He continued reading his magazine. "Damien, who are we waiting for?" the boy asked uncertainly. Damien looked at his son-in-law with a nonchalant face. Then he took a deep breath and exhaled. "We're waiting for Liz. She's about to get here. Liz is the girl your wife beat up. She's also my daughter." Unfortunately, Matthew blushed. He even had a fleeting thought of getting out of here before it was too late. He didn't want to face the man who yesterday was lying on the floor with a Rassesian neck, but there was no time to escape. A young blonde woman in a white robe appeared in the doorway. She looked haggard, bruises were visible under her eyes. Her whole face was swollen, her neck was bandaged. The girl moved very carefully, like a robot, without turning her head. However, when she spotted Damien, a smile appeared on her face. She hurried towards him as fast as she could, barely moving her feet. It looked like she was about to trip and fall. But it was all over, and Liz reached them safely. Damien had so many thoughts swirling around in his head. There was so much he wanted to say to this girl, but it all seemed to slip his mind. Emptiness. He felt uncomfortable with the silence, but it was like his tongue wouldn't listen. Damien just stood still and stared at the pretty girl. "Good afternoon, Damien." She extended her hand to the man, but he continued to stare at one point. Matthew even waved his hand in front of his eyes to get him out of his trance, but Damien remained unresponsive. Suddenly, a ray of sunlight hit him in the eye, and it was as if he woke up. He immediately noticed the girl's outstretched hand, her confused look. Instead of shaking her palm, he pulled out a bouquet of flowers. Matthew wondered where it had come from. After all, there were no flowers when he arrived. Damien held out a beautiful bouquet of soft pink roses to Liz with a pleased expression on his face. She gratefully accepted the gift and set it aside on the coffee table. Now they stood again like 2 inept teenagers, looking at each other in silence. Matthew decided to intervene. "Boy," he shook Liz's hand and looked away embarrassed. "I'm Darcy's husband. I want to apologize to you for my wife's behavior. It was a terrible situation. I still feel bad about it." Liz smiled. "Thank you. I'm glad you came to see me," she said, turning to Matthew. "How are you feeling?" Damien intervened in the dialogue. "I had an operation yesterday," she wrinkled her face. "It wasn't that complicated, but I had to endure general anesthesia. The doctor took a lot of shrapnel out of my neck, but I should be out in a week. I'm sorry you can see my swollen face right now. Unfortunately, IVs have a big effect on our appearance." She laughed a little. "I'm very glad you're in a good mood," Damien said. "I hope you feel better soon." There was an awkward pause. Damien realized that Liz wasn't going to say anything else, so he took Matthew's hand as if he were his own son, put a smile on his face, and said to the girl, "Well, off you go. If you don't mind, I'll visit you a few more times." "Of course I'd like that," Liz replied. "I apologize for the awkward question. What kind of candy do you like?" The girl blushed even more, then answered, "I won't say. Have a good day." Damien was a little upset by this answer, but he decided to leave the poor girl alone. He wished her the best of luck a few more times. Then he and Matthew left the hospital. Damien immediately lit a cigarette. "Is there any more?" Matthew asked, hoping to relieve his stress. "You're young, you should be healthy," Damien told him off. They walked slowly to the parking lot. "Why are you so concerned about Liz's condition?" Matthew asked. "What do you mean?" Damien wondered. He even stopped, threw out his cigarette, and then said with a sigh, "So you're so indifferent to other people? You don't care about the fate of another person? Your wife caused Liz the kind of damage she will live with for the rest of her life. The scars from those shards will scar her forever, and you don't care." "No, of course not," Matthew answered uncertainly. "That's why I came to see you." "Why?" "Darcy scares me. She said she did it on purpose. I want you to know that she thinks that Liz has bad intentions about you, that she wants to be your kept woman and live off you. And to be honest, when I saw her, Darcy's words popped into my head, and I even believed them." Damien looked up at the sky. The sun was no longer warm. Autumn leaves were falling from the trees. Winter was coming. The snowball was about to fly from the sky. The children would start going to the slides and skating. Damien loved this time of year. He basically loved watching nature, the changing of the seasons. It took him away from his problems, from unnecessary thoughts, gave him a reset, a different perspective. What does she care about my love life? Damien finally answered. Matthew was surprised. What do you mean? She's your daughter, worried about you and her inheritance. Matthew thought for a moment. He thought about how he could justify his wife, but he couldn't find the words. I will forgive her, Damien said, but keep her out of my private affairs. Tell her that she won't go to any more business meetings with me. Thank you, Damien, Matthew said. They had already arrived at his car, so the guy had already gone to the driver's seat and started the car. I respect that decision, Matthew. Don't let Darcy worry. I'll just remind her that everything you have now has been achieved not only by her labor, but in most cases she had help from me. That car you drive now was a gift to you. This apartment where you make love to my daughter. Matthew blushed terribly. He wanted to go underground and never come back out into the world. Okay, Damien, he stretched out, not looking the man in the eye. And then he just got into the car and slammed the door shut. Through the glass, he heard Damien's voice. I'll call you tonight. There's something we need to talk about. And Matthew drove away in a pensive mood. He was confused and tense. After all, Darcy was right. This Liz is trying to turn his head, and he is like a mouse walking into a mousetrap to his death. In the evening, the bell did ring. Matthew was sure that Damien would call Darcy, but that's not what happened. They were watching television together when suddenly the cell phone rang. Matthew, who's calling you? Darcy asked with some tension. It's work, Matthew answered quickly, and went into the other room. He was nervous when he saw Damien's name on the phone screen. Damien, the boy, answered uncertainly. He glanced at the door and sensed that Darcy was eavesdropping, so he moved to the other end of the room and began to speak in a whisper. Yes, Matthew, hi, I'm calling you with a proposition. I decided to leave Darcy out of it for now so it wouldn't come up again. So, my mom's anniversary is coming up. You mean her grandmother's? Yeah, when is it? A month from today, December 21st, which is a Sunday. So, tell me, will you and Darcy be there? Well, of course, it's her grandmother's. Oh, great. Then I'll send you 2 weeks' notice. Why did you call me and not Darcy? I think she'd be happy to hear the news. I told you she's not ready to have this conversation. When I was a kid, she used to resent me for a week for pointing out her mistake, but that hasn't changed. Let her live like this, but don't mention the anniversary. She'll find out when the time comes. All right, Damien, she will. And then Darcy entered the room. Her doubts were confirmed. She was definitely eavesdropping. But Matthew was quick to recognize it. All right, I got it, he said, taking on a confident, businesslike air. You got it. And he dropped the call. Exhaling discreetly, Darcy approached him like a sly fox and immediately asked, Who called you? My boss told me to bring a file to work tomorrow, Matthew answered. Darcy didn't respond with interest and immediately slipped away to another room. In the days that followed, Damien was determined to ensure that Liz received the best care possible. First, he paid her 150,000 rubles in moral compensation, and then persuaded the management to move her to a private room. They had not met since the day Damien first saw her in the hospital. Everything was handled by his lawyer. But 3 days later, Damien decided to visit Liz in person. Hello, he peered through the crack in the door of the room. May I come in? A woman's sleepy voice answered in the affirmative. Damien entered the room. It turned out that Liz had just recently woken up. She was eating something that looked like porridge from a gray hospital plate. The girl was very surprised by Damien's unexpected arrival. She even woke up and tried to fix her hair. Well, good morning, she said, embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't think you were coming, so. Don't apologize, Damien said, slowly entering the room. I brought you some tangerines and oranges. I hope you're not allergic to citrus fruits. No, Liz smiled. I'm very glad you came to see me. I'm glad you came to see me, and I'm glad of what you've done for me. Liz, can we go back to you? Yeah, of course. I'm a very mature, experienced person. You too, of course, but you've got your whole life ahead of you. It's hard for me to say this right now, and maybe you won't understand me right away. Liz watched with terrible interest. Damien knew how to intrigue. I feel like an inexperienced teenager right now. It's just, do you want to go on a date with me? And Liz pulled away. Was there even a twinkle of fear in her eye? Or was it a spark of desire? Damien still didn't understand. Damien, I'm sorry, I guess I rushed you, she said. He backed up abruptly. We don't even know each other, Damien lowered his head in frustration. Damien felt like running out of here, but Liz suddenly continued her thought. Yes, we don't know each other very well, but our friend's supposed to come on a date. I think that's what dating is for, to get to know each other, isn't it? Damien immediately blossomed. His face seemed to come alive. He moved closer to Liz and said, "Then next week I'll take you to some amazing places. You'll love it. I guarantee it. I trust the professionals." "And yes, we're on a first-name basis," the girl said with a smile. "Oh yes, it's very unusual." Damien was embarrassed. "Well, then I'll take you away from here until Monday?" The girl wondered. "Well, yes." The man smiled slyly and left the room. A week later, Damien arrived at the same place and entered the same room. "Good afternoon, how are you?" The man did not warn the girl in advance about the meeting, but he knew that this very day, Monday, she would be discharged. She sat in the room on her suitcases and waited for the doctor to bring her documents. "Damien?" she shouted. "Not Damien, but Dima," smiled the man, walking into the room. He was already in a formal suit, except that he hadn't brought flowers with him. "But I'm not ready," sadly replied the girl. "My face is swollen and my neck looks terrible." "You won't need a face," Damien smiled, and then he realized that it sounded very strange and decided to correct himself. "The place we're going doesn't require it." "Well, you'll see when we get there. Or have you forgotten?" At last the girl was given the discharge and was free to go. They walked to the car and Damien opened the trunk. Damien pulled out a huge bouquet of red roses and a gift-wrapped box of chocolates and handed it to Liz. She was taken aback by the gesture. "Thank you," she replied, stammering. "Now, let's go," Damien said. They both got into the car and drove off. The drive took only 20 minutes, and soon they were there. Liz saw a two-story, gray, unremarkable building. She was even a little disappointed. Had Damien decided to bring her to some factory, but upon entering, she realized it was clearly not a factory. The receptionist handed them carnival masks. That's what visitors were supposed to wear. "All the adventures," Liz clarified. "Yes, we're going on a real adventure," Damien confirmed and put on the mask. They entered the spacious hall. At first, it was completely white. There were only a few visitors, but after a few minutes, a miracle happened. A blue beam of light flashed on the ceiling. Then it spread all over the walls of the hall. It was so spectacular, it took your breath away. And then Liz recognized in this picturesque performance Van Gogh's painting Starry Night. The girl was simply amazed. She had never seen anything like it in her life. And Damien looked, without tearing himself away, into her dazzling eyes, which, at last, for the last few days shone with happiness. They moved on to another hall. In this hall, a field of sunflowers could be seen right on the floor. One could smell them, smell the wind blowing. It turned out that all the halls in this exhibition were dedicated to Van Gogh. In each hall, there was something unusual connected with his paintings. In the last hall, they lay on the soft, bed-like floor and looked up at the ceiling. This hall represented the painting Starry Night over Rona. It was something very impressive. And not just because there was a soft floor. It was as if this painting had come to life. Somehow the organizers managed to make a pool here and disguise it in such a way that it really looked like the sea, relaxing. The music seemed to gently introduce the atmosphere of this painting. Damien cried from the excess of emotion. He had never experienced anything like this in his life. Liz seemed to remain enthralled as well, and when they looked at each other, it was as if a spark had traveled between them. Liz reached for Damien first, but he didn't hesitate and kissed her on the lips. It was the most romantic night of their lives. It was from that day that they started dating. "You decided to date," marveled Matthew, who was sitting in a nearby chair by the fireplace. Matthew arrived at Damien's house to pick up some paperwork, but Damien couldn't help himself and told his son-in-law everything. "Shh, don't tell anyone." "I want to announce it myself at our family dinner," Damien explained. "At your mother's anniversary." Matthew couldn't contain his surprise. He was in a terrible state of shock at the news he'd just heard. "Matthew, I trust you more than anyone else in the world. You really have always seemed like a responsible and reliable person to me. That's why I trusted you with this secret. Yes, I do love Liz terribly. But you've only known her for a month. You can't fall in love just like that," Matthew objected. "Son, you're still young, aren't you?" Damien grinned. "Pour yourself a brandy. But when your time is short, you cling to the slightest sympathy. You see, love can be nurtured. It can be grown out of ordinary sympathy. It's all about knowing how to do it. But you really don't know her at all. What if she's not who she says she is? What if you're making a terrible mistake?" Matthew objected in a panic. "Stop scaring and panicking. I'm sure of my choice, and I'll announce it soon," Damien finished. He took a sip of brandy and then concluded, "I think that's all for now. Thank you for the interesting conversation." Matthew made a few more attempts to talk some sense into Damien, but all of them were unsuccessful. The boy didn't understand why his father-in-law was doing this. What is it about this girl? Is she really that special? No, of course not. Matthew had no contact with her, but Darcy's words echoed in his head every time he saw Liz. She was now living at Damien's house and had walked past the living room where they were talking 3 times. She was smiling. But that smile seemed somehow fake, artificial. Maybe Matthew was really paranoid. Maybe he'd fallen under his wife's influence. But something was obviously wrong. A decent girl couldn't just move into the house of an almost unknown man twice her age, and such a pretty girl, too. Now, Matthew was almost certain that Darcy was right. Liz clearly wants something from Damien. She'd moved into his house for a reason. But this news of the proposal upset Matthew terribly, as if they'd lost this battle before the battle had even begun, though he didn't even want any part of it. Darcy had started it all, and she seemed to be right about everything. Darcy picked up 2 postcards from the floor. Someone had slipped them through the front door. They were red with a gold ribbon. She recognized her father's handwriting immediately. He loved those colors. They hadn't spoken in a month. Matthew, we have an invitation from my father." Darcy shouted across the apartment. The boy quickly ran over to his wife, and they printed out the letters. "My sweet children, you are invited to your grandmother's anniversary. There will be a banquet, family night, coziness, all the things we love so much. Be sure to bring your other halves. Everyone's welcome. We'll sit together as a family, talk to each other. We don't get to do that very often. P.S. I have some exciting news for you." After reading it, Darcy almost burst into tears with excitement. She missed her father so much. At last their relationship could be saved. This anniversary was the perfect chance. Matthew thought otherwise. He realized that as soon as Darcy heard the news, she would simply burst with anger and cut off communication with her father forever. The situation seemed hopeless, but Matthew tried to do something about it. "Listen, what date is this event?" the boy questioned. "I think it's the 21st, Darcy answered. "What? But we're going to the theater on the 21st. "What theater?" "The theater," the girl said, exasperated. It was a surprise. "Well, if I hadn't told you." "Did you really buy theater tickets? For once?" "Oh my God," Darcy almost squealed with joy. "But what about father? He'll be terribly offended," Darcy objected. "No, we'll have to cancel the tickets. I wouldn't do that to my father." "But darling, I wanted to surprise us." Matthew had lied to the last minute. But Darcy wouldn't agree to anything. She felt a terrible guilt towards her father and wanted to atone for it tonight. Matthew just accepted the circumstance and went with the flow. "Whatever happens." "Honey, are you really going to give us the biggest wedding ever?" Emily grinned, sitting on David's lap. He was fascinated by her beauty and, of course, nodded as if mesmerized. "Well, of course, darling. I'll make you the happiest you've ever been. You won't have to work anymore. But now, to earn the money for our wedding, I have to work a little harder. So if you'd be so kind as to take Max for a walk." "Max?" Emily replied in disgust. "He can't be walked by our servant." "First of all, John is not our servant, dear. He's my domestic helper. It's not his job to walk the dogs, and old Max likes to be walked by someone who's willing to play with him." Emily was reluctant at first, but then she agreed. She tried to honor her man's requests, even though she didn't always like them. David went to his office, and Emily reluctantly went to call the dog. "Max," she shouted across the house. "Max." At last the dog responded and approached the new man. "Finally. Can't wait for you." But as soon as Max approached her, she bent down to put his collar on him. He licked her face in appreciation. Emily screamed in fright and disgust. Emily was horribly disgusted, starting to feel nauseous. She felt like she was going to throw up. John came running in. "Emily, is something wrong?" he asked excitedly. "Yes," Emily screamed hysterically. "To walk that damn dog who ruined all my makeup." And she kicked poor Max with her foot. The dog wasn't used to violence, so he didn't even dodge, because he was sure the man wouldn't hurt him. He whimpered resentfully, and Emily went to the bathroom with an angry face to wash off the nasty saliva. "Disgusting dog," she shouted one last time. John had to walk the poor dog in her place. Max was very resentful and didn't want to play with anything. When they got home, they were met in the hallway by David, who was very surprised to see them. "John, what are you doing here?" questioned the host. "It's raining outside, so we had to end our walk early," John said sadly. "That's understandable. But why were you walking Max?" I asked Emily to do it. She refused to be a part of it. "Apparently she just doesn't like animals," John explained, a little embarrassed. "I'm sorry she kicked Max with her foot." David was furious, but he didn't bother to find out who was right or wrong. Maybe Max had reacted badly to her and snapped at her. It could have been anything. He decided to just forget about the incident until after their wedding. It wasn't long before the big day arrived. Relatives began to congregate at the mansion. Slowly, the cheerful noise and lively conversations began. David liked this chaos. There was something native and warm in it. At last, Grace, David's mom, arrived. Well, at last. David exclaimed and hugged his mother tightly. He loved her terribly. Everything he had achieved he owed to this woman. She had fostered in him charity, kindness to people. She helped him open his first charitable foundation and supported him financially along with his deceased father. "Sonny, come here, Mommy will give you a kiss," smiled the old woman. She kissed her son on the cheek and went into the living room, where her favorite chair was waiting for her. Soon Emily, Darcy, and their other halves arrived at the house. My granddaughter's Naomi called out from the living room, "Come here, my darlings." She began kissing and hugging everyone. A nice domestic conversation began. In half an hour, all the other guests had gathered, but there was still one behind the scenes. But David wanted to announce him a little later. "How have you all grown? What a great bunch of you," admired the Jubilee. All this time, while the relatives were chatting with each other, Darcy did not take her eyes off her father. When he noticed her attention, he approached her. "Hi, sweetheart," David said. "Hi, Daddy. It's been a long time." "Oh, it's been a long time," he paused. And for Darcy, it was the most awkward pause of her life. "Dad, I want to apologize." "No," he interrupted her. "Let's not dredge up the past. Let's just start fresh. I want us to continue loving each other, as father and daughter should." The girl smiled and nodded in agreement. She didn't think it would be so easy to earn forgiveness, but she was glad for this unexpected event. She walked over to her husband and whispered something in his ear. "Papa has forgiven me," Darcy said. Matthew congratulated her, of course, though deep down he knew there was nothing to be happy about. The guests continued to talk until David tapped his glass. Matthew immediately realized that it had begun. "Dear friends, we are gathered here today to celebrate the anniversary of my beloved mother, Grace," David said. "It was this person who gave me not only life, but also faith. Faith in the best. Faith that anything in this life is possible. As many of you know, our family has achieved everything with our own hands and our own minds. And first and foremost, thanks to my wonderful mommy." Everyone raised their glasses and drank to the health of the birthday girl. "But that's not all," David continued. "I want to tell you one more piece of good news on this happy day. When we are all here on such a beautiful occasion, I hope you will share my joy." He paused for a moment. "A man has recently come into my life who has helped me to change many of my views on both life and art. That person is here now, outside the doors. I ask you to welcome." He stood up and immediately opened the door, and Liz walked into the room in a gorgeous black dress. "Please love and welcome, beautiful Liz. She is my bride." The room became so quiet that Alex's breathing could be heard as he sat next to Grace. No one dared to utter a word. Everyone was struck dumb. David had expected something like this, of course, but here was Liz. No one responded to this solemn speech, so she became hysterical and ran out of the room. David immediately ran to catch up with her. The people in the living room began to whisper. "That thing never gave up on him," Darcy said in an angry tone that only Matthew could hear. Matthew's heart sank into his heels. He felt like a dead, departing corpse. He didn't want to feel like that. He clutched his hand, and Darcy noticed it. She yanked him up, started shaking him, and screamed hysterically. "Did you know that? You knew, that's why you didn't want to come here. You knew it all." Matthew didn't answer anything. His eyes were focused as if he had taken drugs. No one knows, maybe he had taken something to calm his nerves. But it seems the guy was trying too hard, because his eyes stared into the void and his ears heard nothing. There was only the ringing of his wife's screams. David came back alone, all frazzled and tired. "I apologized to my fiancée. She's a complete idiot," Darcy finished loudly. "I thought we'd made up." She said it while looking her father straight in the eye. "Look, all that blonde girl wants to steal his inheritance, and he refuses to see it. She's half his age. All she wants is his money. I tried to save him from her once, but I've had enough." Darcy took her husband's hand and led him toward the exit. As they passed David, Matthew whispered to him, "I'm sorry." The front door slammed shut, and then the sound of a car pulling away was heard. Some, it must be said, reached for it. Even Amy, the second daughter David had counted on, turned away from him. "Amy, wait. Where are you going?" pleaded the father, trying to stop his daughter. "I'm disappointed in you," she said, and pulled her hand away, almost squeamishly. In the end, Grace, David, and silent Alex were the only ones left in the room. "What are we going to do?" Mom asked. "I love her," Damien shouted, red with anger. "You're a fool," son, his mother said regretfully. "Your real wife was a good one. But this one, as soon as she came in, I almost had a heart attack. Where did you find such a slutty woman?" Mom, the adult son said fiercely. Grace leaned heavily on the table, stood up, and without a word, picked up her cane and walked out of the living room. Damien didn't bother to stop her. He only asked his driver to take her home. That left him alone, apart from his faithful dog Fred. Damien sank into his chair and began to pet the dog. "Once again we are alone, friend Fred." But the conflict didn't fade for a moment, and she came back in the morning, as if nothing had happened. "Why did you do that?" Damien soothed her as best he could. "Why do they dislike me so much?" "They don't even know me," Liz cried. He hugged his bride and said, "We're going to get married no matter what. Do you want to? Do you want to go pick out your wedding dress next week?" She smiled broadly. Yes, the bride should have a gorgeous dress and the groom a great suit. Liz perked up. She was clearly intrigued by the proposal, and by the afternoon she had already started calling different agencies that could organize her magical wedding. 3 days passed, the situation had settled a bit, but her daughters still hadn't been in touch. Damien didn't understand what they were so offended by, and what his mother was offended by. They don't even know how beautiful Liz is spiritually. Listen, honey, I've been invited to the orphanage to talk to the kids, give them a lecture. How's that sound? Damien suggested at once. An orphanage, Liz said with a disgruntled look on her face. Yeah, I'm a sponsor. Well, I told you about it, Damien replied. How long are you going to be there? How long? The children need good sweets, toys, new clothes, and attention. Of course, they need it all so badly. So many people had donated clothes to charity this year, so there would be enough for everyone this time. Liz hesitated, but she still put on a smile and went with him. Deep down, she hated children and everything to do with them, but she had to pretend for Damien's sake. His eyes shone with happiness as he gave these kids candy, gave the girls to try on their bright new dresses. Liz, please help that girl over there put on that pretty dress, Damien asked. And Liz smilingly took that girl around the corner and started to put the dress on her. God, the damn dress. You're too fat for it, she grumbled as she tried to dress the child. She tried her best to help the strange aunt, but Liz put the dress on very carelessly. It even hurt the girl. It hurts, she whimpered. Shut up, you wretch, be patient, you orphan brat, Liz whispered angrily, and slapped the child on the back with her long, hard red fingernails. If only she knew who was standing behind her at that moment. Get away from the girl, a low bass suddenly commanded. Liz turned around in horror. Damien was staring at her. He was terribly angry. Get away from the girl, he repeated. Like a fox, she sprang up quickly, glaring furtively, and stepped back a couple of meters. You get out of this building and wait for me in my car. I'll be back in half an hour, Damien said dryly. But Damien, Liz started. I said leave. There was metal in his voice. Liz didn't test his patience and walked out of the orphanage, cursing this girl and this day. Just as Damien had said, Liz got into her car and waited for her fiancé. Soon she saw him on the porch. He was hugging the teenagers, again giving them gifts. But Liz wasn't the least bit ashamed. Yes, she had been rude to the girl, but she really didn't listen to her. However, until they were married, Damien would call the shots. Liz had already figured that out. But why do it? Why spend so much money on strangers? Liz yelled to Damien across the car. She really didn't understand it. It's called kindness, Damien replied. And Liz hadn't heard of it. You could have made a fortune like that if it weren't for the constant spending. Every teenager there has a phone, because everyone needs a phone nowadays. It's essential to our development. There are very kind, understanding kids in this house. They have never been abused in their lives, much less heard screaming. I pay special people to make this orphanage thrive. I'll never understand you, Liz said. They drove in silence for half an hour, and then Liz said, We're going to pay tomorrow, so give us our gold card. Okay, Damien said tiredly. His rose-colored glasses were starting to break. Through the cracks, he was beginning to understand the essence of Liz. Then one night, he hatched a plan. Hey, can you help me? He asked his friend on the phone. Did you see what time it is? It's 3 a.m, Damien, shouted an exasperated Matthew. It's very urgent. Are you free tomorrow? Well, I have a couple of clients in the morning, but then I'm free. Tomorrow I'll come to your place and you and I will have a play, one-actor theater. Damien hung up the phone and spent most of the night working on a plan. The morning after, he made Liz an amazing scrambled egg royal, put a love you note under her plate. Then he left on business and put a gold card on the table. He had come to see his longtime acquaintance Matthew, from whom an old debt was long overdue to be discharged. And now, at last, a suitable case appeared. Matthew sat him down in the barber's chair, covered him with a cape, and asked with a smirk, So, what are we going to do? I'll start by becoming an elderly foreigner, Damien said with a smile. Meanwhile, Liz ate breakfast and drove to the bridal salon in high spirits. After a 2-hour drive in traffic, she was terribly tired, but it was worth it. She was met by a smiling sales assistant. Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to welcome you to our boutique. What would you like for coffee? She asked. Yes, hurry up. Liz interrupted her as she looked at the dresses. I'm sorry, but we don't have coffee. We sell dresses, the saleswoman replied. And this is a boutique, not a market. Liz was indignant. Coffee for me, I said. The poor shocked employee ran off to get a cup, and Liz continued to look at the white dresses. Just then some gentleman entered the boutique, clearly a foreigner, wearing dark glasses, a beard, a solid paunch, and a strange tall black hat. God, what a freak ran through the girl's mind. The employee returned with a plastic cup and handed it to Liz. She looked squeamishly at the cup and then at the saleswoman. "What is this?" Liz shouted. "Are you suggesting that I pollute the environment in my hands with this crap? God, what kind of unscrupulous people are these people?" "Excuse me, can I have a refill?" she whispered fearfully. But Liz snatched the cup away from her, or rather, almost snatched it from her hands. She took a sip of coffee and grimaced. "You call that good coffee? What was in the machine?" the clerk muttered frustratedly. Liz rolled her eyes and started looking at the dresses again. Liz picked up the hangers and threw them at the employee, as if they were in the trash. The exhausted consultant realized this and began to follow her around the room. Liz dropped some of the dresses and didn't bother to pick them up. "Hey, you come here," Liz shouted to a coworker. She ran up to her, but not so eagerly. "Find me my size," Liz demanded. "You see, the thing is, these dresses are made to order," she replied. "We sew them or alter the chosen dress to the customer's size." "Well, then, take my measurements or whatever it is you do. Do something." The employee ran behind the screen, leaving Liz alone with the man in the room. "Young lady, I apologize for intruding. When is your wedding?" he asked politely in a slight accent. Liz looked at him haughtily, appreciating his rather plain suit. This foreigner was obviously economizing on his appearance. Liz noticed that immediately. "None of your business," she snapped at him. "Yes, I suppose it is," the man nodded. "Excuse me, just one more question. I just have a wedding coming up too. Can you tell me what kind of suit to get? You girls are always good at that." "You don't need a suit, you're just wasting money. And your wife obviously doesn't care," Liz grinned. "Why are you being so cruel?" said the man sadly. "I was only trying to make her happy." "Man, get away from me," Liz thought. "I'm busy right now." The stranger stepped away and then left the salon altogether. It seemed that Liz had really ticked him off, but she didn't care. She had been very nervous since yesterday, and all that anger was being vented on the people around her. An employee walked into the hall with a measuring tape. The employee walked over to Liz and began taking measurements. "Oh, you're hitting me. Be careful," Liz shouted, twitching as if she had been pricked. "I apologize," the poor shopkeeper apologized. She seemed to regret working here 1,000 times. In a few minutes, she finished taking measurements and moved away from the nervous customer. She came to the cash register and began to write down something on a piece of paper. "I have written down your measurements," she said cheerfully. "Now all you have to do is choose a suitable dress." Liz went back to browsing through the assortment, which she shivered at. Somewhere on her face was a look of disgust. "No, I need something else." "These are all awful," she concluded after a few minutes. The employee sighed heavily and went behind the screen again. She came out a couple of minutes later and brought a lovely dress, lush, glittery, rhinestone embroidered, with delicate feathers along the bottom in English white. "Oh, it's just right," said Liz, delighted. "Check out." The saleswoman smiled. She could please even such a fastidious customer. That was progress. She went to the cash register, calculated the advance payment, and wrote something down on her slip, then handed Liz a card. "The order will be ready in a week. If anything changes, please call me," she said. "Okay," Liz replied. But her words were interrupted by the horrible smell of rotten fish. Liz turned around and saw a hobo in tattered clothes. He was holding a real dead fish in his hands. Liz couldn't believe her eyes. "Honey, I want that fish back," shouted the drunk. From the reaction of the employee, it was clear that she was just as shocked by what she saw as Liz herself. "Man, are you confused? This is a bridal salon, not a market," she replied, dumbfounded. The situation in the bridal salon had become completely absurd and unacceptable. A drunken tramp with rotten fish, a beggarly old man threatening Liz. It was all too much for her. The alcoholic came close to the cash register, the horrible odor making Liz sick to her stomach. She couldn't stand it, so she snatched their phone card from the clerk and ran out of the store into the fresh air without even paying. Breathing in the frosty winter air, she felt better. But not for long. On her right, she was called by a horrible, ragged old beggar. God, they don't let a sick old man enjoy his life, slamming and slamming these doors. "It'll be easier from here." Liz was indignant. "It won't. At least they give you money. People like you should be rotting in the dungeons. You don't bring anything to society, you just do your nails and ask for freebies. Get out to here. Stop scaring people. And if you give me money, my dear, I'll go away safely." The old man smiled ingratiatingly, holding out his dirty palm. "You know what I'll give you now? I'll kick you under the breath, and then I'll call the police. They're on your right, they'll give you warmth and food," Liz said angrily. "You're cruel. Why would you do that? I'm just having money problems right now. My son has cancer. I'm trying to feed him somehow, and even a penny would help. So you got a job, asshole. What am I giving you advice for anyway? You got to pay for my advice too." "I'm not a free counselor," Liz said and walked away, calling her personal driver on the phone. Evil always comes back. the old man shouted after her. Liz stopped. Those words made her incredibly angry. Or I walked up to the man and spat on the pavement a centimeter away from him. "I hope people like you die out soon," she whispered threateningly. "You stinking bitch. Where do the police look?" Then the tramp's heart started to race, and it got worse. The gray-haired old man lay on his side. He seemed to be suffocating. "Help," he whispered. "I'm dying." Liz listened to nothing. She called her driver, got into the car and drove home at breakneck speed. Damien continued to pretend he was a poor man dying of a heart attack. "Oh my God, man, can I help you?" "I need help," screamed the saleswoman while dialing the number for an ambulance on her cell phone. "Oh my God, you must be having a heart attack." But Damien stopped her with a wave of his hand. "Don't," he said sadly, in a different tone of voice. "I was just disappointed in an angel today," he concluded with a note of bitterness in his voice. He immediately got up from the asphalt. The employee rushed back to the store, and a few seconds later brought him some water. He drank it greedily. "Thank you very much," he thanked the nice girl. "I'm ashamed of my fiancée. She spoke terribly to you. She's a terrible person, I must admit." "Is that this is your fiancée?" The saleswoman marveled. The tramp smiled and stood up from the pavement. He shook the snow from his clothes and stared at the girl employee of the boutique. She was standing in the cold in a short skirt and a thin tank top. Shivering from the cold, she wrapped her arms around her shoulders. He immediately caught up and threw his clean jacket over her, which he took out of a nearby bag. The girl tried to refuse at first, but he convinced her. "Don't worry, I borrowed this from an actor friend of mine. It's a perfectly ordinary jacket. It doesn't have any lice on it," the pseudo-bomber smiled. He led the excited employee back to the store and asked, "Can I ask you one favor?" "What is it?" "You see, yesterday I had a fight with my fiancée. I thought it was nerves, but during the night it was like my eyes opened, and I decided to give my future wife a test. I wanted to test her for kindness, for cordiality. Unfortunately, this experiment was a complete failure, a failure in my personal life. I saw the true face of the one I thought was a goddess," the man said. "I'm sorry that it stinks," he suddenly asked, forgetting about his request. The female employee laughed. "Yes, some crazy person came in with a dead fish," she laughed. "Now the whole store will have to be ventilated for 2 days." And then the girl looked at him strangely and suspiciously. "Excuse me, I haven't met you before," she asked. "Yes, I came into this store today in the guise of a foreigner. Maybe you saw a stranger here with a strange hat." Yes, that was me too." The clerk was amazed. She didn't know people could transform themselves so professionally. It was real magic. Damien also smiled at this comical situation, but his frustration continued to plague him. He couldn't marry a girl who didn't match his principles at all. After all, his main thing in life was kindness, but she seemed to only care about his money. She had no empathy for other people. He knew that Liz was now riding in the car with his driver to his ancestral home, but he had time to do something about it. He called the driver, who was also his bodyguard. "Plan B, Jake, Plan B," he said. "Copy that," he answered, and disconnected. Damien realized that the next few hours were going to be the hardest of his life. He really wanted to marry Liz, but he couldn't go on like this. She would be on his neck faster than he could say yes at the registry office. He arrived back at his mansion in the late afternoon. The clock read 10 p.m. He walked through the gate and approached the house. Damien certainly didn't expect to see Liz on the bench. He thought his bodyguard had done everything right. Then why the hell was she still on his property? "Damien," she shouted desperately as she caught sight of his figure. Damien had been raised well enough, so he didn't ignore the girl, but he decided to keep his distance. He walked towards her with a confident gait and looked at Liz with the most serious look, and his face didn't express an ounce of emotion. "Damien, your security guard has the nerve to keep me out of the house. What is this?" "I have to get him fired," she complained. "My security guard has never been wrong, never is. And right now you really can't enter the house," the man calmly explained. Liz's eye even started twitching from nerves. She didn't understand what was going on, and Damien was in no hurry to explain. He just remained silent for a moment, then pulled out the keys to the front door. "Damien," Liz shouted, "what does all this mean?" Damien had been waiting for that question. Answering it was terribly hard, but it had to be done. He had to act like a true gentleman and leave her handsomely. He stopped in front of her, and then abruptly turned around and looked her in the eye. "Liz," he said confidently, "we can't be together anymore." The light in the girl's eyes immediately faded. The confidence with which she had complained so vehemently evaporated. Fear and misunderstanding took its place. She collapsed on the bench and stared blankly at the stonework of the veranda. Damien was in terrible pain, but he knew it was necessary. He didn't feel sorry for her. She deserved it. However, for the sake of maintaining a sense of kindness, he stepped closer. "Why?" she asked in a huge voice. "I was there, Liz. I was in that damn wedding parlor today. The bum you refused to give a penny to. That was me. You were following me? She was outraged. No, Liz. I just wanted to see your true face without the mask, and I'd seen enough. There was silence. Damien thought so. Liz certainly had nothing to say. You're dumping me because I didn't help the poor guy, she laughed. You're dumber than I thought. Damien staggered back. Liz sounded very grim, confident. She sounded like a mad woman whose devious plan had gone awry. The man took 2 steps back from her, and Liz, in turn, stood up resolutely. Yes, you may have seen my true colors. I'm sorry I'm not as good a sheep as you thought I was. You must have dreamed I'd be a wonderful hostess and wife. Bullshit. It's ridiculous, Damien. What girl in the modern world wouldn't think about money? Wouldn't be mercenary? You must have thought I was all white and fluffy, that I wouldn't hurt a fly. You were wrong. I know who I am. No, I'm not proud of it. But I just don't see the point in giving my money to people who don't want to do anything themselves, who don't want to solve their own problems at their own expense. Do you really think the world is full of marriages like yours? There are only a few like you, Liz said in a confident tone. The rest of us are just trying to survive on our own, to get through one miserable day. And I'm upset that in all your life you still haven't realized that not everyone is as rich as you are. Your daughters have never seen poverty, never lived from paycheck to paycheck, never counted pennies, never trembled at night from hunger. They are happy people. You and I didn't know each other very well, Damien said. It all went too far. It happened too soon. We don't know anything about each other. Maybe that's a mistake. Maybe that's a mistake, too, Liz agreed. But one thing I know for sure is that I'll always look out for my own benefit. I don't care about the people around me. Why I came into this world alone, and I'll leave alone too. And there's only myself to rely on. Are you wrong? Damien asked. No, Liz argued. No, I'm right. And I'm glad we broke up before we got married. I was getting sick of your kindness. She shushed him and headed down the stairs. Damien stood still and stared at the floor. Liz started to walk away, but he managed to call out to her and ask, Liz, tell me, did you have any interest in art? It was fucking art that saved me from poverty, Liz replied briefly and walked away into the darkness of the night. Damien didn't see her call a cab as she drove away. He continued to stand on the veranda and stare at the floor. Just now he felt so insignificant and humiliated. Never had his kindness been portrayed in such a bad light. The days that followed passed like a blur. He had asked his agents to deliver all of Liz's belongings to her, but when they arrived at the right address, no one was there. Who knows where she had moved to? But Damien hoped that Liz had started her new life with a clean slate. Though he didn't rule out the fact that she'd run off to find herself a victim again, he thought about her words for a long time. He realized that they had so rarely had heart-to-heart talks with each other, that they hadn't even learned about each other's childhood, about what they had experienced. They knew nothing. It frightened him. How could he propose marriage to a girl he'd known for a month and a half? How his wise head hadn't realized such an obvious thing. It was just awful. A week later, he went to the address of that bridal salon. There was another woman in the boutique. Hello, he said sadly. Can I cancel my order? Hello. Could you tell me what number the order was placed for? Damien said the numbers. The woman looked in her computer's spreadsheet, but found nothing. I'm sorry, when did you place the order? A week ago. Then she asked me to wait and went into the back office. You serve someone named Liz? That's the number. A week ago, I heard someone's voice ask Liz behind the curtain. Yes, a woman came out of the den, followed by the same girl he already knew. Oh, it's you, she exclaimed, recognizing Damien. Damien couldn't hold back a smile. He was pleased that he was remembered by this sweet, kind girl. He was even a little embarrassed. Yes, I wanted to cancel the order, Damien asked. The girl immediately ran to the computer and began to process the cancellation. They were left alone in the room. Did you cancel the wedding after all? She asked. Yes, I had to. We're very different people, as it turns out, Damien replied. Could you tell me your name? The girl asked. Damien, the man answered. The girl nodded. And yours? As if in jest, he asked. The girl looked at him suspiciously at first, then laughed. Kate, she smiled. Kate pulled out some sheets of paper, scribbled something down with a black pen, and handed it to Damien. Fill it out, please, she asked. The girl watched with interest as Damien filled out the paperwork. He was blushing more and more, but he seemed to enjoy it. Listen, are you free on Friday? Kate asked suddenly. For you, yes? Damien answered confidently. 6 months had passed. A lot had changed in Damien's life in that time. He had a real relationship, which he was now working diligently on. He was in no hurry to propose to Kate. She was fine with it. He had finally reconciled with his daughters, and they really liked their father's new girlfriend. She was the real thing, not a cheap fake like Liz. That one, as it turned out later, didn't even have her own name. Her name wasn't really Liz, it was Elizabeth Brown. Kate and Damien matched in character. They had common interests, and most importantly, she was a kind soul, sincerely loved the world, and he reciprocated. Damien couldn't get enough of watching her play with Fred, sit for hours in his huge library, reading avidly with a blanket over her legs. Still, some things in Damien's life remained the same. Every Friday, he sat by the fireplace with Fred and now Kate, listening to classical music and watching the silent stillness of the trees that beckoned with their quiet beauty. Now he felt completely free and happy and thanked fate for having once brought him to her. This girl possessed both intelligence and patience, and most importantly, the warmth of her soul. I am a professional editor with a higher philological education and 20 years of experience. Do you think I'll be able to draw this tree? Kate asked, as they sat under the dark pine needles, each reading his own book. I think it's worth a try, Damien answered with a smile. So Kate took up painting and enrolled in a preparatory course at the Academy of Culture. Liz, on the other hand, achieved her goal. She married a rich German man who was temporarily living in Russia. A month later, he took her to Germany, and there they were married. And 2 years later, Damien married his Kate too. They arranged a simple, quiet wedding without lavish dresses and expensive spending, and everyone in the couple was very happy and content. I'm so glad, Dad, that you found love, Emily marveled. After all their troubles and sorrows, they sat together again in a family circle at Darcy's apartment. She had just learned how to make wonderful pies, so she had decided to celebrate with some good family gatherings. Actually, Damien Matthew said, I didn't give you and Liz Brown a chance. Everyone laughed. I knew it was bullshit. But Kate really is a wonderful girl, and I'm very happy for you. Thank you, my family. Damien wept, letting his feelings come out. Those were just the words I needed to hear. Thank you. And then they continued laughing, chatting, and just having a good time together. And as Damien looked at the quiet happiness surrounding him, he realized that he wasn't alone anymore. He now had everything he could ever dream of. Robert had been surrounded by female attention since kindergarten. The girls tried to be paired with him at matinees, brought him candy and cookies from home, insisted that at quiet time their crib was next to each other. They demanded at home that they bought the most beautiful hairpins for their hair or weave into the braid a brighter colored ribbon. This frenzy never ceased. At school, this state of affairs only worsened. Not by years, a tall boy with dark hair and blue eyes broke the hearts of not only classmates, but also teachers from the fairer sex. They did not raise their hands to reprimand him or lower his grade when his answers were not up to the highest grade. Although his appearance did not resemble the appearance of an angel, he did not look like a demon at all. He was like a stately, humble Greek god with a piercing gaze and an enchanting smile. He didn't speak, but he spoke the words that obediently formed into correct sentences without stuttering. He studied easily, took prizes at Olympiads in all subjects, gallantly asked girls to dance at festive parties, moved amazingly during incendiary discos, turning any music into his obedient servant. Robert and Elizabeth were inseparable almost from the very beginning of their acquaintance. It was useless to drive a wedge between them. The girl moved to this city with the family of her military father. She was laconic in everything: clothes, hairstyle, school bag, pens, and notebooks. When the class wanted to make fun of it, Robert was right there. Somehow it happened that he took under his protection a little girl who stood last in the long row in gym class. The girl with gray eyes, 2 pigtails, tied with black rubber bands, for some reason caused in him a pinch of pity. A lump in his throat stuck. But this little girl was not a bad girl. She pulled the girls back, asking what kind of dense material she was made of. We lived in the north for a long time. In the schools there, they were heated in winter, but we still had to insulate additionally. Do you want to talk about it? The curious people backed off at once. What's the point of getting involved with someone like that? It's not worth it. She's too quick with her tongue. Robert grinned to himself and invited Elizabeth to sit at the same desk with him. It's free. I usually sit alone. You'll be comfortable. You can see the blackboard. It's the penultimate desk in this row by the window. In his soul, he had not yet settled in Elizabeth's address romantic notes, but he always wanted to take care of her like some young, helpless puppy. At home, he had a beagle given to him just at that time for his birthday. He had dreamed of a sheepdog, but their apartment would not support such a large dog. Here in their family, an appeared mischievous, cute beagle, a faithful friend, selflessly loving later their masters and completely unpretentious in care, the sweetest companion with soft ears and a long tail. Robert was unusually patient with his parents, cuddling and nurturing him all the time. Suddenly he realized that Elizabeth was more than just a friend, companion, and sister in spirit to him. When she badly shattered her knees one winter when she fell on the ice, they were already in 8th grade at the time. From a small, graceful statue, Elizabeth began to turn into a petite young lady with the crushes inherent in her young age. The girl was incredibly stubborn. She dragged him home after school across a smooth, vacant lot prepared for digging foundations for a new building. "Don't go, Robert, it'll be 5 minutes before we're home. It's too long and uninteresting to walk around that fence, especially in this weather," she urged. He'd fallen for her pleas. Now she was sitting on the cold ground with her tights torn to shreds and deep lacerations on her knees, stumbled over pieces of rebar left behind by who knows who. He didn't hesitate long, picked her up in his arms and carried her to his house where no one was present. In the apartment he treated the wounds, which after he had washed away all the blood with peroxide, did not seem so horrible anymore. They were 14 years old. Hormones were certainly starting to rage in their bodies by now, but they weren't what made him kiss her lap near the wounds. Tenderness nudged him gently. She wasn't frightened. She leaned over, hugged his head, and nuzzled the top of his head. "Robert, are you scared? It's okay. You've got tea in the house or something to go with it, haven't you?" "I'm starving." "I'll never make it home," she laughed. From that day on, they kissed each other on the cheek when they met. They walked mostly hugging now, but without any hint of closer proximity. Peer girls were ready to wipe Robert in powder for the fact that Robert did not notice anyone around, but they did not dare to do any harm. Only sometimes they let out barbs. But the young couple could do nothing. Even stain their friendship could not, so pure and light it was. In the graduating class, everything suddenly changed. Both grew up and could no longer ignore the natural laws of nature. Robert realized that this was his first love. She was not a whim or a temporary eclipse brought on by young age. This girl had firmly established herself in his heart. It happens that even handsome men belong to the clan of those who meet their only woman once and are faithful to love her afterward for a lifetime. Let someone try to argue that this is a fairy tale. After school, both entered the university, he at the Faculty of Physics and she at the Faculty of Economics. In the educational institution on, Robert again began the hunt. Having gone through the crucible of naive passions at school, Elizabeth and Robert did not even cast a glance at his admirers, and they, like snakes, hissed back. "Where's he ever been? He's at least in Hollywood, starring in a movie instead of Richard Gere. They can't be together. It's absurd." In one of the lectures in my freshman year, I was amused by a scene. The subject was common history. Different departments listened to it together, without division into physicists, chemists, geographers, and economists. Among the female students, as usual, was its star, its first beauty, its prima donna. She had bet with her fellow students that she would steal Robert away from Elizabeth in no time. She was counting on her striking looks. Men on the streets would crane their necks when they saw her in the crowd. She didn't mince words with the guy. She just sat down on his lap without even giving him a second thought. In front of the student crowd, not at all embarrassed. Robert didn't bother to embarrass the arrogant person. With an expression as if he had touched a nasty toad, he took her by the shoulder with 2 fingers and pulled her off his lap. "Don't ever do that again. My heart is occupied. It's about time you all realize that." Belle was taken aback. "Are you talking about that roof that's always dangling beneath your feet? Don't make us all laugh. What could you possibly have in common with her?" Robert's blue eyes filled with an angry glint. "Thank you, my girlfriend can't hear you right now. But the rest of us should know that behind your beautiful shell hides an evil heart that knows no true feelings. You're nothing. I don't envy anyone who would give their soul to you. You'd trample it for nothing." After these words, the curious crowd parted and Elizabeth came up. Robert calmly put his arm around her shoulders and said, "Come, let us sit in the other row. There's a foul smell of meanness here. I hate that insidious odor." Elizabeth did not understand anything, but she did not argue with him, as was her custom. Her man was young. That was a fact, but always very sensible. If he said so, there was some truth in it, however strange. He had also announced to her parents 6 months ago, in the same cavalier manner, "Elizabeth and I love each other, and that's forever. We'll quarrel a little at university, and then we'll get married. Our decision is not subject to appeal, so all arguments are canceled in advance. Both families lived modestly. Parents couldn't afford a separate place for their children. Therefore, at a general family meeting before the modest wedding, it was decided that Robert and Elizabeth would marry after the 3rd year of study, when the university begins training in a narrow professional profile. So they did. Further in their life, everything was very similar to the life of other families. They did not grab stars from the sky in material terms. At the end of their 5th year, Joan's firstborn was born. 3 years later, Catherine. Just like to write a classic saga, married, have produced 2 children, dreaming of a 3rd child. The search for women around Robert persistently continued. Even the boss of his mother's colleague laid her eyes on him. In his office hung his portrait. He invited the door on the key immediately locked in his fashion attire. Shows of new collections of local tailoring sometimes happened. The place specialized in men's clothing. The walking mannequin was a left-handed kid. The catch was that the audience immediately recognized his unconventional orientation. The audience started laughing. And then Robert caught the eye of the businesswoman. We don't want such a nature to go to waste. And we don't want such a nature to go to waste. Young man, only dress up, and the butterflies will no longer choose suits for clients, and this miracle to admire. Catch a Guy decided to catch a high fee, which intended to also include services of a personal nature for herself and defile on the runway for business. When I told Robert the salary, he couldn't believe his ears. What kind of accomplishments? You offer me a salary 5 times more than my mother, a seamstress with vast experience. The woman once again assessed him from head to toe. You seem like a big boy, bigger than some. I don't need to explain it to you. If you are obedient, I will buy you an apartment, a car, fancy rags, accessories. I will take you to restaurants and hotels. I will teach you to have an elite vacation at the seaside. You'll travel with me a couple times a year. Isn't that a tempting prospect? I think you misunderstood me. Robert removed her hand. I'm not the one to make that kind of offer. Find yourself another easygoing boy, and don't let my refusal to get back at my mother make you regret it. The incident was over. The lady didn't bother him anymore. After her, there was a smashing master of men's haircuts. She kept trying to press up against him during the process of fighting with his unruly hair. He was so accustomed for his short life to such outbursts from the female sex that he never paid any attention to them. Nor were the pretenders to his heart offended. He was too good-looking. It's a sin to be angry with such a man. Robert, even in the university, disappointed in applied physics. It wasn't the way he'd envisioned it at school. All the 4th and 5th year in the evenings he went, as if on the 2nd shift, to the liquor factory to work part-time. They just loaded the finished product for shipment to the regions, and they lived in a rented apartment. There was a new monetary unit, 1 gun, or 1/2 liter for stronger drinks. Jokes are jokes, but Jennifer and Robert themselves were indifferent to alcohol. But they used it actively as gifts, to a plumber for replacing a faucet, to an electrician for repairing the wiring. Robert was constantly missing at work. During the day he worked as a design engineer at a machine building plant, and in the evenings a loader. Jennifer sat with the children, smoothly transitioning from one maternity leave to another. She had not yet applied her talents in economics. They lived amicably. Robert got along with his wife's parents, Jennifer with his parents. The usual family unit. That seemed to be the end of their story. But would fate let them go without a trial? They were waiting for a loving couple. And what a couple. The attack of severe pain in his back caught Robert in the evening. It was a cold winter at home. He was still working at the liquor factory. Times were tough. Although Jennifer had put her eldest son in kindergarten, the younger Catherine constantly demanded attention and was often unreasonably cranky. It was impossible to go outside with her in cold weather. Pulling pain with periodic sharp jabs in the area of the spine forced the man to go to the doctors. There he first heard a new word that became a diagnosis: hernia. As he understood from the doctor's words, it was about problems with the spine and discs. The doctors assured him that if he took care and did not lift heavy weights, everything would be fine with constant monitoring. He would live happily ever after. So Robert had to say goodbye to loading and unloading for now, a source of money. The financial situation of the family is somewhat shaken. and Catherine has not outgrown childhood colds, constantly either sniffling or coughing. District pediatrician strongly advised to take the girl in the summer to the sea, preferably for a couple of months. Otherwise, she would also be sick at school. Elizabeth, of course, found it impossible to go to the sea with only one daughter. It was out of the question financially to have a vacation with the four of them. The solution was to choose the lesser of two evils. Go to the sea with the three of us and the children. Robert somehow in 2 months will get out to them at least for a weekend. That's how the three of them went to the more or less democratic Anapa. Robert stayed home to do chores. Since some time a new tenant had settled in their house, a woman in her 40s, the owner of several clothing stores in the city. She moved into an apartment in a remote neighborhood, she said, so that the eyes of her husband, after a high-profile divorce, did not see her. The clever husband tried to sue half of the business from her, and the case with boutiques she created and developed herself. As she liked to quote the hero of the movie, Ivan Vasilievich changes profession by hard labor. Andrei and the yard-bright lady immediately noticed, and he seemed to her so flawless that she immediately wanted to participate in his fate. She invited him to work for her. Engineer, physicist, and fashionable business, two parallel planes. But surprisingly, he did well. His machine-building plant was living its last days. The technological lines were obsolete. No one, not even the most talented designer, could come up with anything ingenious to get this enterprise back on its feet. And the neighbor needed an assistant with decent looks, who could charm the partners with charisma and impeccable manners. Robert was perfect for this role. As for his wife, she just needed a deputy with an ideal reputation as a model family man. Her chain of stores was called Family. It stood for 7 friendly eyes. They sold clothes for men and women, as well as for children. Michael was very skeptical of her suggestion. He laughed, "Where am I with my technical education? And where are the clothes, new collections, all this glitter and tinsel of rags and accessories?" Jacqueline, on the other hand, was not so adamant. "Michael, do you underestimate yourself? Each of us should be willing to sell what we have in abundance. In your case, it's God-given beauty, so why not turn it into a popular commodity for the sake of your well-being? Let's just give it a try. A month's work with me won't cost you anything." He walked home and thought wistfully, "Nothing will come of this collaboration. She will again start looking for ways to get closer to me. And for me, such an option is impossible." The man was wrong. Jacqueline was a much wiser and more astute woman. She already had a young and strong companion for her health, but he was not smart enough to be seen with him in public, and her firm needed a male face. She used herself as a female face. What was missing was an idyllic image, an assistant with an impeccable reputation. Michael agreed to the experiment. Especially at the factory, everyone was on leave without pay for an indefinite period of time. Time was passing. Soon his family would return from the sea, and the house was empty. He couldn't make any money while his loved ones were improving their health on the coast. Jacqueline taught him the science of being, not appearing to negotiate patiently, to watch his speech, to dress tastefully even for a little money, to be able to maintain a conversation on any topic. She persistently dragged him along to all business meetings and brought him into her circle. After a couple of weeks, Michael calmed down. Jacqueline did not make any attempts. She diligently molded him into an enterprising business partner who is not lost in any commercial situation, will calculate ahead of all the moves, will increase the accumulated, save previously achieved. When Elizabeth returned home, she did not recognize Robert. At the train station, they were met by a respectable man in a strict, elegant suit, matching shirt, stylish tie. From surprise, she could not restrain irony. Where did such a handsome uncle come from? Then she rushed towards him and hung on her lover's neck. "No, you told me, of course, that you changed your job. But I could not imagine that the change in you would be so radical." At home, in a clean apartment, Elizabeth and the children were waiting for a set table, new toys, items of clothing, bought by the head of the family as a gift. It would be a happy life. But insidious envy is always around. In a barrel of honey finds a spoonful of tar. The range of Robert's duties included not only labor everyday life, but also accompanying the owner of the stores, Jacqueline, to corporate events held in her company and at the enterprises of colleagues in the trade. For some time now, Jacqueline had been obsessed with the idea of expanding the chain with 2 new department stores. She suddenly wanted families to be able to shop in her facility entirely without leaving the buildings and retail space. She was already negotiating for furniture. But even that didn't seem enough for her. In her dreams, she saw people coming into her realm for the day. In addition to non-food items, peeking into retail outlets with a large assortment of high-end products from farmers and private owners. Then it's off to a cafe, a pastry shop, to celebrate successful purchases with drinks and sweets. She even found such a chef that she believed in success in advance. His handmade cakes and pastries were amazing. Even adherents of eternal diets could not resist and sat down at the table with everyone. The business promised to be very profitable and promising. Only one obstacle hindered these endeavors. An official from the city administration did not want to put her signature on the authorization documents for operation. She was an impenetrable old-school aunt, with no visible weaknesses. Jacqueline went all out, pulling in all her connections. But the case was stalled. Robert's boss was quite desperate, but then she learned a thing that made her hair stand on end. It turns out that the Iron Lady secretly liked to play, went to neighboring cities to indulge her passion for gambling away from the prying eyes of fellow countrymen. Moreover, she was very fortunate in this vice of hers. The owners of gambling houses were afraid of her appearance. Luck did not leave her for long, constantly increasing her secret capital, but no one tried to prevent her. After all, Madame was from the highest echelon of power at the local level and could close gambling establishments with a single movement of the hand. Having learned such sensational news, Jacqueline immediately decided to give Robert a delicate assignment. She will hire a private detective to find out what kind of places this lady likes to visit. Robert will casually get acquainted with her and try to get dirt in the form of photos and videos of her game. Yes, it wasn't the most ethical way to get the lady to back off. Jacqueline didn't like it herself. But what else was there to do? In the fight against the enemy, all means are good, even such a sneak attack. The preparations for the operation went smoothly. For a good fee, the secretary of the administrative lady leaked the information that she had taken a few days of vacation at work at her own expense. All indications were that she was going on a trip to one of the cities where she could indulge in gambling. After tracing where the train tickets had been bought, Robert was sent on a business trip. He only joked. "You've made a commercial spy out of me? You've got addresses, passwords, where to go and who to introduce myself as. The only thing left to do is to glue on a mustache and a beard for conspiracy. And then we can go on the job." One thing he didn't tell anyone. Robert took home all his savings, saved for a rainy day, to try his luck next to his lucky aunt. Moreover, he borrowed a large sum from the head of security at Jacqueline's office. It never occurred to anyone that he was playing with his luck, and he'd had a large drink of whiskey at the bar beforehand. Robert sat at the table next to the lady from the administration and was terribly angry. She bet on one number or the other, chose black or red color, and almost always won at least a small amount of money. He, on the other hand, lost every last dime. All the promises of beginner's luck turned out to be nothing, and he was never lucky. The waiter kept bringing him whiskey on the rocks. His head was getting heavier and heavier. He had forgotten all about his mission. At some point, his patience broke. He rose abruptly from the table, pushing away the waiter who was just about to pour him another drink. With a hard look at his lucky neighbor, he shouted, "Fuck you and your administrative capabilities. I'm here almost in my underpants camera carried to film you at the game, and you do not give a damn. It's all ha 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 until you've had enough." It was a scandal. Security instantly searched it and found hidden cameras and recorders. The official threw the money and instantly disappeared from the hall, not forgetting to grab the winnings. Jacqueline could not forgive Robert for the failure of the operation. That powerful lady couldn't. With some inner instinct, she realized who was so interested in collecting dirt on her. Jacqueline's dream of creating a nice shopping and entertainment centers crumbled into small shards. Now, when she met Robert in the yard, she didn't even say hello, deliberately averting her face. Robert came home like a beaten dog. The family piggy bank was empty. A servant from Jacqueline's entourage hinted to him that he would not wait long for the loan to be repaid. He would soon put him on the meter and follow him everywhere. At the machine factory, where Robert had a small position, they were not going to start the lines. Thoughts swirled in his head that his ex-wife was wrong. Where to sell beauty if no one in this world wants it? Only at the distillery did he have all the peace and serenity. Maybe he is weak, worthless head of the family, not capable of anything in this life. By all accounts, it appeared that his only dignity, loyalty, and devotion to his beloved woman. But he had nothing to feed her and the children. His feet carried him to the glass rows of vodka and liquor bottles. Where he had worked before, he could be useful. Why, his back was aching by evening, and he would bear it. His wife needn't know how he earned every penny. Soon tales are told and deeds are done. Usually within 2 years of working at the liquor factory, the family's financial situation has improved. Son Joan and daughter Catherine already went to school. Elizabeth found a job as a cashier in a small company. The salary was meager, but she could pick up her children after school, take them to classes, feed them at home properly, and check their lessons without rushing. The globe was spinning on its axis. The years went by slowly. The next bright burst in the career of 30-year-old Robert happened as if by magic. Apparently, the heavens took pity on his monotonous, like Groundhog Day, life. By that time, he had not bothered to find a more decent job. He remained infantile and uninitiative in this respect. He had little faith that there would be any change in his professional destiny. Elizabeth was tired of convincing him that Jacqueline's education and his looks could have been a good match for him. But he had been dealing with money debts for so long that he had always avoided any career opportunities, as if they were the hot milk of failure, potentially shaking his temporary well-being. Further events unfolded as follows. Robert's home liquor company began bottling a new line of elite liqueurs. In such cases, one cannot do without advertising, which the management did. In one of the pleasant spring days, the factory yard was filled with unusual noise. A commotion began. A crowd of curious people gathered. It's not every day that a real movie is shot in front of your eyes, a whole series of reels. Rumor has it that even billboards will be prepared. See how the bosses have splurged, whispered in the crowd. The workers must have had high hopes for those chocolate and coffee liqueurs. They're too sweet for us, too sweet, too sweet. They say they're aristocratic drinks for the ladies. But for us, it's all the same, as long as the advance payment and wages are paid on time. To the surprise of the audience, an ugly scene played out right in front of their eyes. Some actor of the local theater suddenly got into a pose and began to argue with the director and cameraman. Why didn't you tell me at once that you had to present ladies' goods? This you spoil my whole image of brutality, my reputation as a macho on stage and on the screen. Find him among the workers, someone with a face, and shoot him on your billboards. What kind of whimsy is that? Echoed him in the tone of a confused director. Where will I find a suitable texture here? They all have matchstick faces. Well, how with such a hot drink? It's a Klondike to work next to them. The workers looked at each other resentfully. The sight was no longer languid, and they immediately became offended. You insult us, my man. You insult us, my man. Our beauties have their own glamour. Your acting is no match for his. There he is. Robert was passing by on his way to the dining room for lunch. He never liked noisy spectacles, so he tried to stay away from the performance organized by advertising specialists at the factory. But curiosity, as always, won out. The director was a master of shooting commercials. They could use an extra, even a popular model with a fresh face. The reality exceeded all his expectations. Past the improvised set was such a handsome man of 35 years that the director in the first moments dumbfounded, then quickly pulled himself together and asked to follow him and sprint. It would be a big mistake to miss such material. A man? Yes, you, I'm talking to you. Could you slow down a bit? I can't keep up with you, he said. To what do I owe? Robert stared at him with his impossible blue eyes. I don't have such a long lunch break, and there are long lines in the cafeteria. The director looked him over once more from head to toe. Oh, what a good-looking man. His breed, his manners, his impeccable masculine figure, his correct facial features, seasoned with charisma. He was ready to pinch himself on the arm. Such Hollywood standards with snow-white teeth can't just walk around an old-fashioned distillery unperturbed. Yes, he doesn't seem to know the price of his appearance, thought the director, and said aloud, would you agree to help us out? Inner instinct of advertising business master for some reason immediately realized that to promise this man a golden mountain from the jump is not worth it. Here it is necessary to press on pity, to emphasize the failure of deadlines, on friendship and mutual assistance, to tell about the deadlocked situation with the actor suddenly refusing to shoot, as in the water looked. At first, Robert did not want to hear about any filming, heartily laughed in response to compliments of his beauty and relevance. I have already once tried to sell my appearance as a marketable commodity. Nothing good came out of it. Somehow I do not want to go again in such experiments. Do not chop from the shoulder, tried to press on the pity of the director. If we had not had unforeseen circumstances, I would not have persuaded you now. You'd be a great help to us if you'd agree to do at least a billboard movie. Robert shuddered when he heard the amount of the fee he was being offered. The director decided not to be stingy, not to save money on a debutante. The man thought that this amount could be enough for a small trip to the sea for the four of us. Soon summer vacations. The children could use such an opportunity. 2 weeks later, huge billboards were hung all over the city, on which Robert drank liquor with the lady of his heart. Her role in the photo was played by a young student of the theater school, pretty as a rosebud in her youthful charm. Both looked at each other with such love, holding shot glasses of chocolate liqueur, that there was no doubt. There it was, the cause of the romantic mood lurking at the bottom of the elegant vessels. Sales of the liquor increased dramatically. The director rubbed his hands and waited for the release of commercials. In them, the sweet couple also starred brilliantly. He was very pleased with the photo, talent, and unexpected ability of Robert not to look in the frame stiff. That's the kind of guy the camera loves. After the launch of the videos, Robert began to be recognized on the street, and the products of the factory began to be ordered to other regions. Women looked at the colorful picture and demanded that their men urgently try the magic drink. The fees of 2 random models increased many times over. In the office of the director, more and more often began to hear phone calls. Rising star, shown in a successful commercial, suddenly urgently needed and his colleagues. But he firmly kept the situation under control, took on the production of commercials advertising men's perfume, and then sportswear. Before, Robert faced a dilemma to stay to work as a loader at his native distillery, or to listen to the advice of the new boss and go into the advertising business. The scale was outweighed by a vacation. This time they were able to go on vacation, all 4 of them. Elizabeth and the children were over the moon. Robert even stopped paying attention to more and more often arising in his back pain until he did not disrupt another shooting. He went to the hospital with a severe attack of intervertebral hernia. Life apart from him flowed in its own way. Good they were now, as they call it, with money, could afford to undergo a medical examination in a private clinic. The doctor's conclusion this time was not so rosy. His work as a loader had done its job. His professional trauma had turned into a herniated disc. Robert had to spend a month in the clinic. Through the efforts of therapeutic exercise, drips, and skillful actions of the medical staff, doctors brought him back into action. Before discharge, they admonished him forget forever about heavy physical exertion, even medium, sharp movements of the body. Otherwise, next time you will find yourself right on the operating table. The verdict was final, not subject to appeal. The director met his favorite with open arms. The man no longer worked for him on the birds' rights of the model, which occasionally invited to revitalize some video. Unexpectedly, Robert once proposed an innovative technical idea, then the next. Now he not only starred in his, at first seemingly fantastic developments based on the laws of applied physics, but also came up with more and more new solutions. After he was hospitalized, the company somehow drastically reduced its management, drew conclusions. It was time to offer their talented generator of ideas a solid place in the executive chair. In the active labors on the advertising field, Robert did not even notice how the whole 5 years flew by. Joan has already had time to finish school. There was another significant event from a clumsy teenager. Resembling an ugly duckling, he suddenly turned into a copy of his father. Only his eyes were gray, huge, like Elizabeth's. History repeated itself. The guy was adored by all the classmates and girls from other schools, except that he didn't have his dad's stamina for attention from the female sex. He changed girlfriends like gloves, broke hearts carelessly, in passing, often forgetting the names and appearance of casual companions for one night. Robert and Elizabeth only had their heads in their hands. Joan heeded none of their exhortations. Preds. What do you know, honestly? I don't care how many girls I've had and how many more I'll have. They hang on me in bunches. Why should I deny myself the pleasure? I'm not going to go to school like you. I've already chosen the advertising department, which trains PR managers. I'll approach my dad's current business with more modern technology. But if I'm also invited to do a movie, it'll only be better. Fame will find its hero, or heroes. Joan wasn't your typical narcissist. At first he was shocked that so many members of the fair sex follow him in droves. He laughed I should take another shower. Is it in the maternity hospital? Or is it smeared for them he was bombarded in social networks with offers, and in real-life notes and invitations to parties and picnics, youth parties and nightclubs, or to his home? Times have changed, he told his parents. You're like mammoths. Your views on fidelity, no cheating, are outdated. Robert and Elizabeth did not push him too much, did not bring him up, did not hurry him to settle down, to meet his one and only woman. Let him go out for the time being. It's a young thing, they decided. They were now much more concerned about an unexpected problem that loomed on the horizon. Their daughter Catherine had just turned 15. It was time to think about her future profession. The girl's mind was filled with illusions and fantasies. She decided to become an actress and went to the theater club for the second year. Last week, a friend of the teacher who works as a choirmaster unexpectedly came to the class. She was interested in Catherine, who was performing a simple song from the play at the rehearsal. The woman was impressed by her voice and took her parents' contacts. Later she found Robert and Elizabeth, met with them, and was shocked by the news. Your girl has an extraordinary, rare vocal gift. I listened to her in detail after that chance meeting. It would be a crime if you didn't give her music and vocal training. Who knows? Maybe we're looking at a future great opera singer. Robert and Elizabeth stared at her. Yes, the choral specialist nodded. You heard right. Your daughter has a unique voice which now looks like a rough diamond that will become a magnificent diamond. But Catherine is already 15 years old, Elizabeth said thoughtfully. Isn't it too late for her to learn music and singing? The choirmaster smiled slyly. It's never too late to become a singer, or to learn anything at all. It's strange that you didn't notice that your daughter has such a beautiful voice. Yes, singing never really stood out in front of them. Robert tried to explain his ignorance. Only at matinees in kindergarten, and later her singing I will not remember. The girl saw her vocation in another, remembered herself in the theater, in the cinema as an actress, hastened to dispel his doubts. Woman. And the decision, of course, you. But if I were you, I would buy a piano without delay and devote all her free time to vocal lessons. I'll find the necessary specialists for such a gifted child. I look forward to your call. The piano for Catherine was bought the following week. It's expensive and very beautiful. It's beautiful to look at and play on. Robert personally supervised the loading and unloading of the instrument. He was afraid that the movers would do something wrong. On the platform of the third floor, it seemed to the man that the workers were about to drop their purchase. What's holding this enormous thing on its sides? It's awkward, unstable, he thought. Robert lunged forward, picked up the piano from the side so it wouldn't fall into the wrong hands, and immediately slid to the floor. His eyes went black with pain, and he could hardly move. The movers frightenedly surrounded the client. One of them rushed to the 5th floor to call Elizabeth. The ambulance arrived quickly. At the hospital, the doctors only shook their heads. Too rapid turn of the body, trying to pick up a heavy instrument, did their job. Robert's condition could only be improved by surgery, for which the man immediately began to prepare. It was entrusted to a young, ambitious surgeon, Madison. Already in an hour, she came to get acquainted with her new patient and froze. He was so handsome. Madison, as is often the case in academic and career circles, had shown great promise since medical school. Her father was a brilliant surgeon, and her mother was an equally savvy operating gynecologist. The girl was already accustomed from childhood in the house to constant medical conversations and discussions. Other future as to join the family dynasty, for herself did not see. Personal life, at a rather pretty young woman, did not add up. Robert and Madison were a college couple who had married hastily, but soon divorced after a few carefree relationships. By the age of 30, Madison was left with a bad experience and a burning desire to make things right. She fell in love with Robert at first sight. He scheduled the surgery in 5 days. Madison went to work on her residency in confusion. She had a picture in front of her eyes, snow-white bedding, dark hair with barely visible sagebrush on the pillow, and startling blue eyes filled with pain. She'll make this man smile and forget his ailment. Or is she not a first-rate surgeon? And then there's his wife Jacqueline, who's always getting underfoot. A gray mouse with big gray eyes. What could they possibly have in common? After all, they'd been living together for quite a while. The grown children came to visit their father. Madison grinned wryly, can't push the wife away. I'm on night duty tomorrow. I'll take the bull by the horns as soon as my patient starts thinking and feeling better after the anesthetic. That day and the next seemed endless to her. She ran to Robert under any pretext, touched his forehead with a cool palm, listened to his lungs for some reason. The patient was indifferent to all her manipulations, reviving only when his wife appeared in the room. Nothing, my darling Madison thought. You don't know yet what a surprise I've prepared for myself. By evening the next day, the surgical ward was nearly empty by evening. Elizabeth was going home too. There were some things to be done there. Robert's surgery was coming up soon. After it, she would be with him 24 hours a day for the first time. The children's meals have to be cooked, the house cleaned, the laundry done. Robert is feeling a little better so far. Now all that's left is to get through the surgery. Madison waited until Robert was alone. When all was quiet, she went to his room, where he was alone. The man was dozing uneasily. She snuck under the covers to the patient. The man flinched in surprise and stared at her with uncomprehending eyes. What's going on here? How did you get here? What do you want? Robert asked excitedly. Relax, Robert, his doctor whispered in his ear in a different voice. I like you a lot. Too much. But Robert felt only rejection, squeamishness, disgust. Are you crazy, Madison? I didn't give you any preferential treatment. I didn't hint. I didn't seek your favor. I love and respect my wife Jacqueline too much to even have such thoughts. Such an invasion of his personal territory was beyond his moral comprehension. So he pressed the button to call the nursing staff. Soon a nurse appeared in the room. Her eyes rounded at the scene she had uncovered. Madison was huddled like a snake in the restroom. The man was still looking around fearfully. After calming him down, the nurse snidely asked the doctor on duty, Madison, do you need my help or can I go? There was no response. The woman in the restroom remained silent. A little while later, she quietly walked out of there. Turning around, she gritted her teeth. You'll remember this concert. No one has ever humiliated me like that. Passing by the post, the duty nurse could not help but notice the ironic smile of her colleague. Tomorrow the whole department would know about the night incident. Madison had no doubt about that. So she kept a low profile for the remaining days before the surgery. She kept thinking of one idea. Robert did not say a word, did not show anything that could arouse suspicion in his wife about the night incident. He didn't want to upset her with such trivialities. He was polite but cold to Madison. The day of the surgery was finally set for tomorrow. The meeting with the doctor had already taken place. Only Elizabeth was a little nervous. After all, she hadn't sung for a long time, and tomorrow she had scheduled an extremely important meeting with 2 vocal teachers at once. Robert only laughed at Elizabeth's fears. The surgery is elective, not the most complicated, while I'm under anesthesia on the table. You'll have just enough time to meet with everyone and talk things over, Robert said. It's about the future of our daughter, Catherine. You have to be with me, and I'll be transferred to the intensive care unit first. You will come closer to the evening, when you have solved all the questions about the training of our young talent. That was the deal. Surgery to remove a herniated disc in the lumbar spine was not something unusual for Madison, so all her movements were honed to automaticity. She was a surgical professional who knew exactly what she could and could not do. Glimpse once again admiring the beautiful face of the patient, she gave the command to the assistants to serve something, bring something, and herself touched the nerve endings at the site of the operation so that no one noticed. In the protocol of manipulation of this nuance, Madison did not enter. After congratulating her colleagues on the end of the operation, she told the orderlies to bring Robert into the intensive care unit to observe the exit from anesthesia. A reaction to her experiment was to follow later. That was okay. She would wait. She was patient. At 3 a.m., she got a call from the ICU. Madison, your patient is awake, but he can't feel his legs. Madison, come to us right away. We don't understand why there's such a serious complication. Stupid, the woman grinned to herself. I paralyzed him on the operating table forever. But you will never know why he is paralyzed. That secret will go to the grave with me. Because a woman cannot be cornered by unthinkable humiliation. No one dares to reject me. Not even such a handsome man. Madison searched her soul diligently and found not a shred of pity for her patient. What's more, she only now remembered how she knew the man so well. He was the guy who'd graced billboards around town when her mom was into chocolate liquor. And her victim turns out to be a screen star. So much the worse for him. Now his business will be over. How weird is that? Didn't she take the Hippocratic Oath, which includes do no harm? Madison immediately answered herself. I took an oath as a future doctor, and his nerve endings were touched by an offended woman. Now, your inviolable marriage, Mr. Plotnitsky, will you touch? I'll see how long it will take you both to portray the eternal, faithful to each other Tristan and Isolde. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was rushing to the hospital to Robert with good news. She had managed to arrange for piano and vocal lessons with both teachers. Already tomorrow, Catherine would begin to make up for lost time, to prepare for admission to the music school. Her daughter was pleased. Joan was a parasite, he kept laughing. What a parasite. But it's going to happen. We now have our own Maria Callas or Montserrat Cabal in the family, he said, laughing. Then the three of them laughed contagiously, drank tea with scones and cherry jam, discussed that soon Robert would return, and life would go on as usual. Then the children went about their business, and Elizabeth hurried to Robert's house, remembering to bring some goodies for him. At the clinic, putting on a robe, the woman already approached her husband's room, where he was transferred from the intensive care unit. But then she heard the nurses whispering, Lord, why should such a beautiful man be punished by God? I cleaned his floors, and he lies like a statue. Recently he was taken down from the intensive care unit. He can't feel half of his torso from below. What a grief for the family. Elizabeth's legs gave out and she flopped down on the couch. It can't be. What are they saying about Robert? That there are no other handsome men in the hospital. He's the only one having surgery today. Her head rumbled, soothing thoughts. But the heart couldn't lie. It knew the truth, and it bled like a wounded animal. Something had gone wrong for her husband Robert today. Fate had handed down a sentence that could not be reversed. Robert's condition had not changed a bit in a day, a month, or a year. During that time, he and Elizabeth had gone through several stages of acceptance. First, the man was in sullen despair, then in prostration, then in anger at the circumstances. He shouted at Elizabeth, "You must leave me. It is not proper for a woman of 40 to sleep in a cold bed. You realize I'm not a man anymore." Elizabeth reacted to his outbursts in different ways. She cried or, on the contrary, laughed, said that this is nothing, that this is not the main thing in the relationship between a man and a woman. She found new arguments for her husband. Robert, for a while, seemed to calm down. But inside he still did not agree with her, as it seemed to him, unnecessary devotion. He thought that she was burying her feminine nature, took on an impossible burden. He would surely figure out a way to free her from that heavy cross. Madison got off lightly at work. There was a meeting to analyze the actions of everyone involved in that unfortunate operation. Independent experts reviewed the entire protocol of the surgical procedure in detail. They found no medical errors. The patient's complications were attributed to his personal physiologic peculiarities. Madison continued to work in the department, even without a reprimand or reprimands in her file, as if nothing had happened. Only the nurse on duty that night, when the surgeon unusually visited Robert's room, suddenly decided to change her job. She found a position as head nurse on Madison's father's ward. Such a happy coincidence. The girl was smart, and she wouldn't talk about what she'd seen. Only Madison hinted that it was strange how everything with the patient turned out, at the right time in the right place. She didn't have a problem with it. All the more reason for her to feel like she'd overstayed her welcome in the ranks. A nurse with her experience would like to find a bigger position. The two women, Elizabeth and Jacqueline, understand each other and agree. Not long after the heated scandals and Robert's attempts to talk Elizabeth into a divorce, their home became suspiciously quiet and calm. The man was increasingly digging with some blueprints, inventing something. At work in an advertising company, given his early merits, such trouble was left for him. The place of a freelance technical development consultant was formalized on a remote mode and faithfully paid a small allowance called salary. Elizabeth was still working in her small firm, but as an economist. The salary was low, and her savvy helped. Back when Robert was in favor, smiling at everyone from every other billboard in town, she saved some money, put it in the bank for a long time at a fairly high interest rate. There was enough for bread and butter, and even sometimes their favorite blackcurrant jam. With entertainment, Catherine had to temper her appetite a little. But the children loved their father so much that they took it for granted, so there were no serious material worries in the family. After a couple of months of hard work, Robert asked Elizabeth to invite his colleague Michael to dinner. He explained that he and Michael have long had a warm friendship, so he wants to ask him to help with the launch of a new invention in the shooting of commercials. We had a good time. We recalled funny incidents from the life of the native company. Michael lamented that the face of the advertising kingdom could disappear from the screen, and then Long asked Robert to take one and another pose. He gave his resume later. My profession as a cameraman taught me to shoot people in a variety of angles. You've become even more photogenic, Robert. There's something in your eyes. So now we have to base our commercials on your close-ups. It'll be an even bigger success, I guarantee it. Michael was not the least bit mistaken. Advertising office furniture, in which Robert filmed in a huge office improvised boss, the public was accepted by the hurrah. Respectable and dressed with needle, a very handsome man with intelligent eyes created the image of an ideal boss who wants to obey unconditionally. And no one needed to know how to shoot immobilized Robert, laying cushions in the high luxurious chair of a modern manager. After the first experience began to appear other orders. Former magnitude in them was not, but decent money for the family to earn quite well received. Robert, as before, came up with some interesting additions to the technical equipment of the situation in the frame. Everything together made their commercials in demand on the advertising market. Elizabeth breathed a little sigh of relief that her husband had abandoned his idea that they should get a divorce. At least he wasn't having any more unpleasant conversations on the subject. Robert was troubled by something else. After that dinner at their home, he noticed with what sympathy Michael is interested in his wife's affairs, secretly asking him how she is doing. Goes casually on the street when Elizabeth comes to pick up Robert from the shooting. A slightly wild plan was growing and solidifying in Robert's mind. He decided to let his wife go so she could live life to the fullest again. For the cause took zealously, and became even closer to the handsome cameraman, and began to often invite him to the house. On various far-fetched occasions encouraged his attention to his wife. A woman's heart is not a stone. Elizabeth, who had long been ignorant of other people's attention from cavaliers, was susceptible to Michael's behavior. He carried flowers, candy, and fruit to her every time, as if he were courting her. When was the last time she had a date in her life? Over 20 years ago, and now she was living in a cocoon of constant moral fatigue. No, she thought. I have not fallen out of love with my dear Robert. I have always been faithful to him. But sometimes one wants spring in one's soul so much. It is so hard to give up its blooming signs that promise joy. Robert at all these meetings between the three of them was as unperturbed as an iceberg. He pretended not to see that around him hovering love vibes from Michael, and Elizabeth is often embarrassed and does not know how to behave. Moreover, when the advertising company has a loud corporate party, he suddenly said he was sick, complaining of severe back pain. When Michael began to persuade Elizabeth not to miss such an interesting event, suddenly came to life, fussed, began to prove to his wife that she must have fun this evening. And then only supermarkets, pharmacies, nowhere to go. At the party, where for once Elizabeth dressed up in her best cocktail dresses, no one cared about her and Michael. People were enjoying champagne and stronger drinks, snacking from baskets, salad boxes, and desserts. Elizabeth and Michael did a lot of dancing. Elizabeth felt a little dizzy. How long had it been since she'd had a close relationship? A year? 2, 3? She had already lost count, trying never to think about it. After a soulful evening, they didn't take a cab. They decided to take a short walk along the promenade. Elizabeth soon got cold, so Michael threw his jacket over her shoulders and tried to hug her. She rejected his attempt. This conversation is not working, Michael thought. I love you, Elizabeth. Suddenly, Michael took a firm step toward her. I realize I shouldn't be having this conversation with you. You're married, and Robert is my companion. From the outside, my confession seems mean to someone who is not quite healthy, but I can't help it. I am drawn to you with such force that I am losing my head. Elizabeth was embarrassed by his confession, but answered him honestly. The worst part of it all is that I like you too. I wouldn't call it love, but you touch some strings in my feminine soul. Michael looked hopefully into her eyes. Shall I take your answer to mean that I have a chance to win your favor? Let's switch to you after all. I think we can leave all this superfluous ceremony behind already. Elizabeth answered slowly, as if considering something. We'll certainly transition to you easily. That's not the point, Elizabeth replied. You have to understand, Michael, Robert is my life. My only man, the father of my children, my soul and my heart. Right now, I may have the beginnings of a simple desire. I'm alive. But I'm not going to cheat on my husband. He and I are what they call for better or for worse let our heads sit on the same pillow, like Robert's. He's already gone gray since his surgery. I'm not arguing with that either. I'm just covering up the gray that's coming in so he won't see it. Think about it. Do you want a woman like me? Is it worth loving me and wasting precious time of your life? Michael was more serious than ever. All remnants of the champagne he'd drunk at the party were gone. I'll wait, Elizabeth. As long as it takes for you to realize how you really feel about me. I won't even remind you of that. But you should know that at any hour of the day or night, the doors of my bachelor pad are open to you. Let you not confuse that I am 7 years younger, that I have never been married, that having no experience in family life, I will learn everything quickly if next to me will be a woman like you. Then they were silent most of the time at home. Everyone was thinking about his own things. They didn't want to talk. Elizabeth didn't know what to do. Should she tell her husband that Michael had confessed his love to her, that he had promised to wait for her if she decided to leave Robert? She decided against it. She never said a word about that conversation. Michael decided otherwise. He decided to have a frank talk with Robert because he doesn't want to do anything behind his back. He considers it dishonest. He will ask his comrade to let his wife be happy and let her go to another man. That is, to him. Stalling for an explanation he would not. There was too much at stake for himself. He was not really an ardent bachelor, had on the male account of a womanizer dozens of short-lived novels. But his heart was silent. As a professional cameraman, he could spot beauty, distinguish artificial grimaces. He fell in love with Jennifer like an inexperienced boy. The imperfect figure of the not young girl excited him so much that after meeting Jennifer for a long time he could not calm the rapid pulse. She wasn't a fan of makeup. Her childishly naive gray eyes were without a single dab of mascara. He thought that was even better. He didn't see any flaws or imperfections in her, didn't notice what she was wearing today. All he cared about was her mood and her condition. Did she feel good? Was she not too tired? When they found themselves alone without her husband at the corporate ball, he felt like he was on a date with a woman for the first time in his life. Everything he'd had before her had been erased from his soul, from his memory. He was starting his life with a clean slate in matters of communication with the opposite sex. Only this way, not the other way around. The moment he pulled off his jacket and threw it over Jennifer's frozen back, he decided for himself that it was now or never, but he had to talk to her. He had an acquaintance who worked at the clinic where Robert had been operated on, so he knew the whole situation. His chosen one, his Jennifer, should be living life to the fullest. She's only a little over 40. It's a crime against her life. That's what fate had decreed. The conversation between Michael and Robert took place 3 days later. In the living room, two destinies, two contenders for happiness, in love and in love for many years, came together, a cripple and a healthy, strong man, a man who had lost all hope and a man who was very much hoping for happiness. They did not shirk. They were honest with each other to the end. I love her more than life, Michael asked. Let her go, she can still be happy. I offered her a divorce when I found out about my diagnosis and future prospects, Robert explained. She wouldn't leave. Let her decide for herself. They parted not as enemies, not as friends. Before they did, they called Elizabeth and told her that they had had such a difficult but honest conversation. She suddenly took offense. "I'm not a thing. Why are you dividing me behind my back and without telling me?" Elizabeth said. Michael replied that it was Robert's will. He explained that he didn't want to cause her any unnecessary pain. It was so confusing, so frightening. The circumstances proposed for the three of them were not impossible. They could even be called quite civilized. But that didn't make it any easier for their trio. No one yet understood what the decision of a woman who was loved by two worthy men would be. For several days, everything in Robert's house was as if no sharp, momentous proposals had come from Michael. The man himself had gone quiet somewhere, never showing his face. Elizabeth fiddled with the daily chores and paid even more attention to caring for her husband, but was mostly suspiciously silent. Joan's downfall. Another stormy affair, and yet another piece of news rocked them. He was offered to star in a commercial, also to be the face of the company, but a youthful one. He was bursting with pride. "I am also handsome and will soon appear on the first billboards in the city," he said. His father, having listened to his enthusiastic story about his first successes, cooled his ardor a little. "Son, beauty has two sides. My mother and I still turn a blind eye to the endless round dance of your girls. But at some point you'll have to stop, settle down, choose the one you want to live with for the rest of your life." Joan retorted, "Dad, you're talking like you're in the last century. Love is one woman for life. Do you believe in these fairy tales? Even though you and Mom have been together for more than 20 years, you have an ironclad certainty that it will always be like that." Robert shivered. He didn't have that certainty right now. He didn't know. What if Elizabeth still wanted to try a different kind of happiness? These thoughts were slowly making him mad. And yet, he loved her so much that he was willing to let her go. A woman shouldn't have to give up on herself. The atmosphere in the apartment was a little annoying to Catherine. She spent the whole day right after school disappeared at music lessons, and then at home sang romances, which she now passed with the teacher at the top of her voice. Lines from a gorgeous piece were now being sung, touching the notes of romance in her soul. Elizabeth was washing dishes in the kitchen and thought wistfully, "Everything feels like it's pushing me toward Michael. Or maybe I'm looking everywhere for signs, pointers." I sometimes shuddered at the memory of that evening. I couldn't lie to myself. The dilemma how to move on. After a conversation between the two men who love her, circumstances, as always, pushed her to the denouement. The video with her husband in the lead role took first place in a contest of advertising products. To receive the award had to be not anywhere, but in Chicago. That's where the competition was held, regional companies. With this news, Michael again appeared in their house, enthusiastic, handsome, with hope in his burning eyes. "Robert, Elizabeth, this is such a success, such heights. You and I must go to Chicago for this prestigious award. I will help as much as possible to make the trip comfortable," he said. Robert's mind immediately thought, here it is, the one that will make all the difference. Elizabeth must go to Chicago with Michael without me. I will let her go at any cost. Robert was a little miffed that he did not have to persuade his wife to go to Chicago. He immediately considered it a bad sign for him, a harbinger of the separation that would follow the trip. He was engaged in an inner dialogue with himself. What did you really want? That she would voluntarily enroll as a nun. You haven't touched her in 3 years. Robert moved defiantly into the living room to the large upholstered sofa. Elizabeth was packing her suitcase. No closet antics, no special outfits. Leaning toward restraint. This will be a business trip. I'll just act as my husband's official representative and go straight home, she thought. But then why had she put her prettiest lingerie at the bottom of the suitcase? She'd stuffed the bottle of perfume in her pocket, the one Michael had said at the party that smelled so good. Had she already made up her mind, and was she just fooling men? But after all, in her heart is still no answer to the question that concerns them both: who will she choose? In Chicago, in order not to waste time, Michael and Elizabeth arrived by airplane. The events were designed for 3 days. They would also have the opportunity to walk around the city. At the hotel, their rooms were on opposite sides of the hallway, but on the same floor. Elizabeth quickly changed into comfortable jeans, sneakers, and a long sleeve. Screw all the dresses and high-heeled shoes. I only brought them for tomorrow's ceremony. Charming Michael is not part of my plan, she thought. They had dinner right in the hotel restaurant. There was neither the energy nor the desire to look for something else. Before, Michael and Elizabeth had not felt constrained in each other's company, but now it was as if they had a bond of silence. They did not speak, but stuttered on every word. "Do you like it? It's amazingly picturesque," Michael kept saying. His favorite place of power turned out to be a fenced area on the roof of a high-rise building with benches, tables, and even umbrellas from the sun, which were now rolled up. Tidy, cozy, unusual. On the walls, colorful drawings, graffiti. Now they were here alone amidst the city lights fading into twilight, and beneath them was all of Chicago in the palm of their hands. A mesmerizing sight. After drinking wine from a plastic cup, Elizabeth felt a sense of relaxation begin to blossom inside her for the first time. There was a beauty in the change of scenery, after all. Conversation was effortless now. Michael talked about his childhood, about his parents, who lived in a small town near Chicago. They loved their greenhouses, where they grew several unusual varieties of tomatoes. When fresh salad greens appeared on the table, there you could find fruits ranging in color from orange and yellow to black. Michael pulled Elizabeth to him, kissed her. She did not push him away as before, but responded to his kiss. "They like you," Michael said. "Who?" Jennifer didn't understand. "My parents," he explained. "They're very simple, but they're also very warm-hearted people. They'll be easy for you to be with." She didn't say anything against it. She couldn't forget his kiss. And he realized it in his gut. They went to his room in the hotel. After that sleepless night of awarding a statuette for the best work of her husband, as a model of commercials Elizabeth remembered as in a fog. Then she and Michael had nothing to stop them from being together for 2 more days. The man thought triumphantly, "Elizabeth is mine now. She will now leave Robert for good." There can be no doubt about that. He did not ask her anything about it. He was absolutely sure. They flew home in silence. It seemed to him that there was a complete understanding between them. From the airport they went to his house. Hastily, in 4 hands, prepared dinner. Again they locked in a long embrace. They fell asleep in the morning. When Michael awoke, Elizabeth was gone. On the nightstand next to his bed was a note. "Michael, I'm sorry I'm a jerk because I only used you. I had to figure out, can I do it without Robert? The answer is no. You're a very good man. You're very gentle. But my heart tells me I don't love you and I never will. There's still only room for my husband. Thank you for everything." He didn't understand anything. He reread the text of the note, looked around once more. All of Elizabeth's things had disappeared from the bedroom. Would she go back to Robert again? Michael didn't kid himself. A woman like Elizabeth would indeed return to her husband, love him further, understanding everything, and endure the hardships associated with it. And the fact that she gave a temporary weakness, it is understandable. Elizabeth honestly told Michael that she was alive. He immediately added another epithet of his own, real. Michael immediately forgave her and, moreover, did not have any claims to her, did not think that she humiliated his male ego. Robert woke up reluctantly, out of inertia. He did not want to stay in this world. After all, Michael and Elizabeth were supposed to return home from New York yesterday. But Elizabeth never showed up. So she hadn't made her choice in his favor. Joan had gone to a sleepover at a friend's house last night, threatening to spend the whole weekend with her. And Catherine was getting some sleep after the recital. Robert sniffed his nose and thought how strange. The apartment smells like my favorite cheesecakes with raisins and vanilla. Is Catherine up at the crack of dawn and working in the kitchen? The man quickly pulled on sweatpants and a t-shirt, moved into his wheelchair, and drove to the smell of fried cottage cheese. In the kitchen, with his back to him, his Elizabeth was fiddling in a stretched homemade bright yellow t-shirt and black and white checked capri pants, his favorite. The boiling kettle whistled on the stove, so she didn't hear the sound of the stroller pulling into the kitchen. That's what a loving woman's heart is capable of. Like a barometer, it picks up any changes in the family atmosphere. Elizabeth instantly turned around and saw the happy blue eyes looking at her with mute adoration. She rushed to the man, knelt down, and embraced his motionless legs. Can you forget and forgive me all that has happened during these 3 days of my absence? Elizabeth asked. I could not resist. The native instinct of woman was stronger than my moral principles. But I have learned the most important thing: there can be no other man on this earth, and in the whole universe, but you, and let only death separate us, but very soon. Tears flowed from Robert's eyes. He wasn't going to resent her. He loved her too much and wanted her to be happy. Even if not with him, but what happiness it was. His woman had chosen him again out of 1,000,000 men, just as she had done then, more than 20 years ago. Could any new misfortunes ruin their love now? Michael asked her quietly. So, together again. And now forever? Elizabeth answered. Yes, only like that, only together, my love. At that moment, the honored Catherine came into the kitchen. Like her father before, she too was attracted by the curious aroma. Mom, are you making your specialty cheesecakes? She exclaimed. I'm the first to taste. She reached for the ruddy curds on her plate, not even bothering to scoop Elizabeth's sour cream into her cup. By the way, my dear parents, why are you at the movies this morning? It's not like we haven't seen each other in 3 or 4 days. What a tragedy, said Catherine carelessly. Elizabeth thought to herself that a tragedy could have happened if she had made the wrong decision, and Robert could think of nothing at all. He had dissolved into his wife. How good life is, even in a wheelchair. You just have to realize it in time, appreciate it, feel it. Sometimes it's even possible to persevere through tough trials. He and Elizabeth did. Vanessa was on her way to her mother Jessica's hospital. On the way, she was leafing through a fashion magazine she found on a bench at the bus stop. Rich, beautiful, and successful models with perfect makeup and hairstyles, dressed in clothes of famous brands, looked at the girl from the pages. Their beauty was so bright, so perfect, that Vanessa did not even think of envy. It didn't occur to her that she could look good in expensive clothes after a visit to the salon. There was no room for anything expensive in her and her mother's quiet and modest life. Her mother had worked as a nurse in a polyclinic all her life, with occasional part-time jobs as an orderly and cleaner. Vanessa tried to help her as much as possible. The girl never asked about her father. Only once her mother misspoke, saying that people like him would never get in touch with people like them. What did she mean, and what hidden meaning did she put in that phrase? It remained a mystery to Vanessa. In her earliest childhood, the girl had been terribly curious to know who her daddy was. She didn't dare to ask about him as a child, so she could fantasize about him as much as she wanted. The fact that he was not written in her birth documents added even more mystery to him. The girl grew up, and with her grew the role of her father in her fantasies. In time, she began to imagine that he spent his life performing important and dangerous tasks. He was strictly forbidden to disclose the family. That's why she and her mom lived in this tiny, forgotten town. Living in it, it was absolutely impossible to believe that some 200 kilometers away was the brilliant city of New York, in which life was boiling and beating key. And their life didn't even flow, it barely ebbed and flowed, finding its way among the eternal busyness of the mother and the quiet, imperceptible hobbies of the daughter. Vanessa herself didn't remember at what point she started writing down her thoughts, dreams about her father, and life stories. By the time she reached the age of consciousness, she had accumulated so many such records that it would be enough for a small book. Going through the records, the girl acquired her first dream to publish a book and become a writer in that order. After all, she needed the approval of her readers to continue. For now, only 2 obstacles separated her from the moment when the manuscript would see the light of day: money and fear. Fear that her work would not be appreciated. Are you kidding me? Vanessa couldn't say she was unhappy. Mom Jessica, despite the busyness and complete lack of money, always tried to pay attention to her daughter, to please, hug, and cheer up. The girl grew up in love, and therefore not so acutely felt the lack of some things: fashionable clothes, expensive toys, and sweets. Every weekend, Mom took the girl by the hand, and they went to the park or the forest to walk, get acquainted with nature, feed ducks or fish. Once in class, answering the teacher's question, how she knows so much about animals, plants, nature, the girl told about their little tradition with her mother. So she, without wanting to, and without knowing it, made her first enemy a classmate, Kiara. Kiara grew up in a rich family, but she saw no love, no attention, no care. Expensive toys could not replace parents. Fancy clothes, lively communication, and gadgets, family warmth. The fact that Vanessa possessed all of these things, and therefore bypassed her, ignited an envy in Kiara that quickly turned to hatred. Thoughts jumped around in the girl's head like hairs from one memory to another. Apparently she was ready to think about anything but the fact that the bus would stop at the end of the ride. Vanessa would get off at the final stop and go to the hospital. There for the second week, her mom was in the hospital with no hope of recovery. The doctor repeatedly offered to discharge her home, to live with her family and friends. Vanessa refused. For Jessica's mom, she was the only family and friends she had. But there was no strength to support her mom at all. They were barely enough to drive to her mom's house every day, bring home cooked meals, and stay cheerful. Returning home, she would close the door and slowly slump down on it, biting her lip in pain. The nearest, dearest, and only dear person in her life was leaving. There was nothing she could do about it. One of the orderlies hinted for the girl to start preparing. For what? Vanessa clapped her eyes in bewilderment, not really understanding what she was talking about. And she did. For what? Not for the discharge, for the funeral. What funeral? What are you talking about? Mom will recover and will live like we used to. We'd like that to happen, but this disease doesn't give us a chance. You're wrong. You're wrong. Mom's strong, she'll be fine. Besides, the doctor offered to discharge her. Yes, to live to avoid spending state funds. The woman grinned loudly. Here, Derevianko, take this and you'll need it. And she handed Vanessa neatly folded bills. No need, we don't need anything. The catchphrase of all those who really need everything. Maybe not you, but you should see your mother off. I'll tell you everything in order tomorrow, or you'll forget something. I told you, you don't have to teach me anything or explain anything. Mom and I are fine. Only 5 days later, Vanessa sobbed in the arms of the same nurse, unable to accept the fact that she was all alone in the world. The old woman stroked her head and quietly repeated that everything would be all right, that Mom was now in a better world, she was not hurt or scared there. And Vanessa thought how scary it is when there are no close and dear people. Not at all. This nurse will wait for the girl to calm down and go about her business. And in a couple of days she'll forget about Vanessa and her grief. And Vanessa will stay and continue to live in a world where no one is interested in how she is and how she feels. Suddenly the nurse said a phrase that, in fact, turned the girl's consciousness upside down and subsequently completely changed her life. And cry now, you and your mother to bury, and father to support. Men bear grief worse, said the nurse. I've never seen yours. When she realized that she had said something wrong, the woman continued. Do you have one, your father? No, and never had one, Vanessa answered. How come? I don't know. I've never seen him. My mom never told me. But any other relatives? No one. Mom was the only one. It's impossible for a man to be alone. If your parents broke up when you were young, foolishly, and then your pride didn't allow you to reconcile, and your father lives somewhere, does not know that he has a beautiful daughter. Then Vanessa did not pay attention to the words of a kind woman, who, by the way, really helped the girl with the organization of the funeral. Advised and prompted how and what should be done. Without her, Vanessa would not have done even half of what she had to do. In the evening after the funeral, Vanessa remembered the nurse's words. Except to say search, and it's easy. And where to begin the search, thought the girl, absolutely no idea. And she decided to start with taking apart her mother's archive, a massive old dresser filled with various useful and useless but memorable things. Several drawers were occupied by Vanessa's mother's document school, leaving certificates, diplomas, letters, and photos. As a child, the girl often went through them in search of something interesting. Then she didn't pay much attention to old photographs and letters, half of which she couldn't even read because of illegible handwriting. Today she wanted to study everything thoroughly. Among the papers she found the deeds to the apartment. It turned out that the apartment had belonged to her for many years. A deed of gift had been made in her name, but the name of the donor was unfamiliar to Vanessa, and the date was approximately the same as the date of birth of the girl. After spending the night without sleep, trying to make sense of everything that was stored in her mother's dresser, by morning Vanessa was forced to admit that she had learned nothing new. The letters stored were from her parents' girlfriends. Vanessa knew Mom's parents had left this world long before she came along. Mom had been in medical school then. Barely self-sufficient, she was left alone. Then she'd found support in friends and a certain David. Vanessa was interested in the mention of the young man, but he was only mentioned a couple of times. Not enough for the man who later became the father of her child. And the references were odd. David brought her, drove her, helped her. It was like she wasn't talking about her lover, but a longshoreman. Unpacking the largest box of letters, the girl at the bottom found a postcard from a Black Sea resort. Strange, Vanessa said to herself. Mom never said she had been to the sea. The postcard was addressed to her parents. It said that the girl was doing well and the vacation was going well. Well, it turns out Mom had a busy life. And I saw her always busy, tired, running from one job to another, thought Vanessa. In another box, as if to confirm her thoughts, Vanessa found a photo of her mother from the seashore. She was looking at her as a young girl, no more than 20 years old. She was smiling radiantly, hugging the young man around the waist. The problem was that the young man himself was mercilessly torn from the photo. Neither his face nor even his height could be determined. So interesting, Vanessa said. So Mom went on vacation with a certain young man. Probably, most likely, my father. Apparently, their relationship didn't work out with my mom. She threw his picture away and never told me anything. After rummaging through the rest of the papers, hoping to find the second part of the photo, Vanessa had to give up. Dawn was dawning outside the window. She began to drift off to sleep. In her dream, she saw her mother young and cheerful again. She was running along the edge of the sea and laughing. A young man was following her with big steps. He opened his arms, trying to catch the girl in his arms. But each time she managed to slip out of his reach. Vanessa tried to see the young man's face, but it kept dissolving in the glare of the sun. Vanessa awoke just before noon. The June sun was shining brightly outside the window. She had to decide how to live in general and what to do today in particular. She decided to start by tidying up the apartment to take her mind off things. But even while she was busy with her physical work, she couldn't stop thinking about how to move on. Vanessa had a brilliant 9th grade school certificate and a red diploma from the teacher's college she had entered after a classmate, Kiara, had made her stay at school unbearable. Vanessa could not understand when she crossed the road daughter of rich parents and what earned her hatred. Just one day the girl hated her a quiet, unremarkable, excellent student who never said a word against anyone. Kiara turned out to be very persistent and inventive in terms of mischief. In just 3 years, she had developed such an active activity to turn Vanessa's life into a nightmare that the famous quiet girl had no choice but to look for a suitable school and transfer. It was pointless to change schools. Ciara had acquaintances everywhere. So Vanessa, at the age of 18, was almost a specialist. However, she did not have time to rejoice in her diploma. The departure of her mother made all the joys dim and insignificant. For a whole week, Vanessa tried to find a job by specialty in schools and kindergartens. It turned out that no one needed young specialists with a great desire to work, but a complete lack of experience. The money, which after the funeral was left very little, quickly ran out, and Vanessa had to sharply lower the bar of requirements for work. Now she was happy to take any position as long as she could get money for food. She posted her resume everywhere she could, but no one was willing to hire her. Finally, late one night, the phone rang. "Vanessa, good afternoon. You placed an ad for a job. Is it still up to date?" asked on the other end of the line. "Yes, of course," replied the girl, practically jumping with joy with the receiver in her hands. "Are you not embarrassed by the offer to work as a maid?" "No, I'm ready for any kind of work now." "Great. Then they'll be expecting you tomorrow. I'll text you the address. Try to be there no later than 10. The personnel manager is a finicky man. He doesn't like to be late," the phone said. "By the way, are you ready to move to the employer's house?" "Yes, I guess I'm ready." "Where does he live?" "Staten Island." "In principle, you can come from home, but we have situations when you need to stay longer or get up early." "Where is Staten Island?" I don't know, Vanessa admitted, who had never left her hometown. Staten Island is a borough of New York City. That's the city you listed on your resume. Vanessa remembered that she had actually written that in a few sentences, not really hoping for a response. I probably won't make it by 10 tomorrow. I live in another city. Which one? Asked on the other end of the line. Having heard the answer, the interlocutor didn't seem to be surprised. In the morning, you will take the train from your city. It leaves at 6, and you will be met at the station. If you are ready to work, pack everything you need at once. What exactly would I need to be a maid? Vanessa asked. Ahead, at least the caller grinned and hung up. Vanessa sat down on the floor, puzzled. The offer was as unexpected and mysterious as possible. They were ready to send an automobile to the train for the maid. She was so surprised by this offer that she forgot to ask about salary and working conditions. And what was the point of these questions? After all, the girl had never worked. She did not even have a labor book. Besides, the money was enough only for a ticket. Well, it's not much of a choice to starve here for another week, or to take a risk and go to work in the city of dreams. I think the decision is obvious. I'm going, the girl said to herself, and went to pack her things. Vanessa, who had never left the city, was faced with a very difficult choice. But what to take with her on the trip? What would come in handy for work? How would she leave the apartment? With the apartment account, the solution was obvious: give the keys to her neighbor to keep an eye on her. Late one night, Vanessa knocked on the neighbor's door. "Jessica, could you help me out?" she asked. "Yes, Vanessa, what's wrong? What are you doing up so late?" "I already went to bed," the neighbor replied. Vanessa knew perfectly well that the neighbor was lying. No one knew when she slept or if she slept at all. She was awake at all hours of the day and always saw and heard everything. She was aware of every incident, every gossip, every scandal. "Jessica, I have to leave early tomorrow morning. I'll leave the spare keys. You keep an eye on the apartment," Vanessa said. "Where do you think you're going?" The girl's first impulse was to keep silent. After all, tomorrow not only the whole entrance, but the whole city will know about her plans, if anyone in the city is even interested in her modest person. However, having judiciously reasoned that to go to an unknown place, without warning anyone, is definitely not worth it, she replied. "I'm going to New York to get a job. We couldn't find anything here. We need something to live on." "Are you going to look for your father?" the woman asked in a bizarre way. "Who?" "You know, my father. I thought he was from New York." "How do you even know about my father? My mom never told me anything about him." There was nothing to tell. They didn't even get to know each other before she got pregnant and he ran away from her. "How do you know that?" "We moved into this apartment when I was born." The woman hesitated. It was obvious that she was trying to find the words to answer. "Well, people said that you were born to some important man. That's the apartment your mother was given. But your parents didn't have anything serious. I don't know anything else. Don't ask. You know me. I've got no bones in my mouth." "What I would have known, I would have told you," the old woman said, as Vanessa prepared to ask more. "I'm going to apply for a job as a maid in the house of some wealthy man. I'll write to you as soon as I'm settled." "Of course you will. What if they take away your passport and take you where?" "To the border." Vanessa was surprised. "You may be quiet, but you're a good-looking girl." "Jessica, don't worry. They won't like someone like me," she shook her head. "Well, you shouldn't be like that. Your mother, she was the same." All her life, Vanessa considered herself unworthy of relationships. Everyone was ashamed that she was raised by her mother without a husband. And the guys who were chasing her long ago, maybe they could have lifted her out of poverty. She'd be alive now. I feel sorry for Vanessa. The old woman really well treated the young, quiet neighbor, who alone tried to raise her daughter Kiara. It was a shame that she, having lived such a hard life, had left this world so young. Vanessa's mom was barely over 40. However, she looked in recent years no less than 60. Classmates took her for Vanessa's grandmother, and only she saw her as a beauty. And here, perhaps also a neighbor. Having collected everything necessary, Vanessa packed a change of clothes, documents, and the rest of the money. The girl closed the apartment and went to the train station. There were only a couple hours left before the train. Staying alone in the apartment was becoming more and more difficult. A city station at any time of the day is quite a sight. Not for nothing they say that train stations have seen more sincere love than marriage palaces. Vanessa witnessed the real emotions of parting, meeting, friendship, and love. It's as if at the moment of the last meeting before the road or the first after the separation, people's soul opens a little wider, and only the most sincere emotions are the first to burst out of it. Later, when the moment passes, people become more reserved and reserved. When the train came to the platform, the girl turned around for the last time and looked at the city she had grown up in and was now leaving, without much regret. I must say, what, in fact, can these streets and houses mean if there is no one left in the city who is dear to your heart? It so happened that she had no school friends and girlfriends. Or rather, once they had been, but the incomprehensible war, which was declared to her by a classmate, made everyone turn away from her. For 3 years of this war, not only Vanessa and all the other guys could not understand why Kiara was so beaten up on her. The fact that a rich, fashionable girl could simply envy the quiet Vanessa didn't even cross anyone's mind. For some reason, it was at the moment of leaving town that Vanessa remembered her high school years. Probably so that she finally confirmed the correctness of the decision to leave the city and not return. Sitting in the station building, she decided that she would stay in New York, and if the maid job didn't work out, she would find another one. The main thing to get a foothold in the big city, and return to her native tiny town without the prospect of forever will have time. Having made up her mind, she entered the carriage, changed her clothes, and fell into a sound and healthy sleep for the first time in months. Shortly before arriving at the New York train station, her phone rang. "Vanessa, are you there?" "Yes, in half an hour." "Yes." "Great. There's a car waiting for you." The caller gave the license plate number and a parking spot. Sitting in the cabin, she looked around the city with amazement. It seemed that she was in a fairy tale. Beautiful old buildings, bridges, parks, as if descended from the illustrations of fashion magazines. And here, amidst all this splendor, she was to live. Vanessa didn't think at all about the work she had to do. She was not afraid of hard or dirty work. She realized that she could hardly expect anything more now. But one thing she knew for sure was that she was not leaving this city. From the busy streets, the driver turned into a picturesque area. Multi-story buildings were replaced by beautiful mansions. Vanessa didn't even try to imagine who could live in them and what kind of income they had. She heard that the driver called someone and asked which exit to take the girl to. After getting an answer, he drove into the gate of one of the mansions and parked the car. Vanessa sat in a small, cozy lobby, waiting for the personnel manager. He turned out to be a short man, slightly over 40, athletic and focused. "Vanessa, I'm the one who called you. Come on, I'll familiarize you with your duties, show you how everything works here." "Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to work and bringing me here. I'm so grateful." "You'll thank me when you've worked here. You'll thank me when you've worked here. You may think it's a tough job. A lot of people can't handle it. But in fact, if you try hard enough, you can do it all." "Do you have any cleaning skills?" "I hope so. I used to help my mom at work a lot." "What was Mom like?" "She was a nurse and a hospital nurse. I worked with her to make it easier for her." "Mom doesn't work now. Mom died a little over 2 weeks ago." Vanessa didn't notice the man clenching his jaw, as if in pain, but continued talking. "I'm sorry for your loss. We have a somewhat specific cleaning service. As you can see, the interior is very expensive. So for now, your duties will include cleaning the back rooms, the staff rooms, assisting the kitchen staff, let's just say interning on the sidelines. There will be 4 other girls interning with you. Only 2 will stay on. We're not fully staffed yet, so you could be useful in other jobs." "Is there anyone living in the house?" "Not yet. The owner lived abroad for a long time. The house was completed only last year and just the other day finished repair, decoration, and design. So we are still recruiting staff. If you work and show diligence, you will have quite decent positions." "Wages. Are you happy with it, by the way?" I don't know, you haven't told me. I don't know. The man stopped so abruptly that Vanessa ran into him. So you left your hometown and came to an unfamiliar metropolis without even finding out the terms of cooperation? What do I have to lose? I can't get a better job. I can always come back and get a job as a cleaner or a saleswoman. What have I got to lose? Yes, only at 18 you can think so recklessly. It seemed that the last phrase was addressed to myself. How much will I get? Based on the fact that you are a non-professional, inexperienced employee, plus you will live here and be provided with uniforms and food, about $50,000 a month. For the first month you will work without days off, the man warned when he saw the girl's face stretch after the sum was announced. Are you serious? For a maid's job plus food, lodging and clothing is a dream. I don't quite understand you. Are you against it? I'm all for it. Yes, we're ready to work weekends, but also without lunch and sleep. Yes, just leave me alone. So you're happy with the terms? Yes. Great. Here's your room being set up. I'll see you downstairs in an hour. There'll be a general briefing and staff introductions. I'll be alone in the room? Of course. This isn't a dormitory. The landlord has a very human attitude towards people, including the servants. Thank you very much. Vanessa pressed herself against the man in a grateful impulse and felt for a moment that he wanted to respond to the embrace, but held back. Maybe in a hug, too. I think it's unnecessary, the man began, but Vanessa didn't listen. Thank you again. I'll do my best. I hope to see you in an hour. The uniforms are in the closet. For the first few minutes, Vanessa couldn't believe her happiness. More demanding girls might have thought, how can anyone be excited about the prospect of being a maid? But to her, it was fabulous luck, and she didn't want to miss the opportunity. Half an hour later, she was ready and standing in the hallway, trying to remember how to get to the lobby where all the staff was supposed to gather. The corridor was empty. It was quiet outside the room doors. The girl regretted not looking around as she walked and completely forgot to ask for directions to the lobby. Finally, she managed to get to the stairs, going down into a spacious room. The employees were already starting to gather there. Several girls, apparently also maids, were already drinking, getting acquainted and chatting. Besides them were the cook, several of his assistants, the gardener, the guards, the head maid, and the driver, who had brought Vanessa. The girl was just about to approach the others to get acquainted. But at that moment, the man who was introducing her to the house walked in. Suddenly, she realized that she hadn't even asked his name. That's a really strange impression she made on him, without asking his name, or working conditions, or the size of his salary. But she packed up and drove from her hometown to huge New York. Good afternoon, colleagues. I'm Alan, the house manager. I'm going to introduce you to the house rules. Most of the information you've already received. In addition, each of you has a small handout in your room regarding your responsibilities. I suggest you study them, especially for those who have no experience. The house is new, and the owners will move in only in a month. During this time, you and I need to get used to it and learn to work together as a team. You'll find the daily schedule in the room. We'll start living by it tomorrow. Today, familiarization with the house, responsibilities. I warn at once, personal relations, violation of discipline, bad habits, the reason for dismissal without clarification. For all this, you will have a weekend in the house. You are obliged to behave with dignity. The master is a man strict, conservative. Living in the house, he will be with his spouse and son. Perhaps his son's sweetheart will live in the house. How old are they all? One of the maid girls asked. The master's name is David. He and his wife Addison are 45. His son Matthew is 23. His girlfriend Ciara is just over 18. If I'm not mistaken. Our host is the owner of a large gemstone mining and processing corporation. His wife is the owner of a jewelry manufacturing firm. His son has recently finished his studies in England and will help his father in his business. But for any questions, you should contact me. Try to keep contact with family members to a minimum. They are reserved people, and this many strangers is also very stressful for them. They will bring in a staff member to clean their private rooms and serve at the table. It's complicated, said one of the girls. If you are not satisfied with these complications, you can always tell me and we will find a replacement for you, the man said calmly. No, I'm fine with it. Vanessa listened and could not believe her own ears. How far this world was from the one she lived in. Vanessa spent half the day learning the rules and duties, the routines. She walked around the part of the house where she was to work. Vanessa got to know all the staff. She was in such a confused state that she could not fully comprehend the amount of change that had taken place in her life. Perhaps it is only when you are young that you can be so carefree to enjoy everything and change your life so easily. From the next day, her labor career began. Accustomed to labor, the girl did not experience special difficulties, quickly performing the entire amount of work. It was for this that the other maids began to dislike her. The work, designed for the whole day, she performed in a few hours, not distracted by conversations. As a result, Alan began to grumble at the others, who were much less eager to work than Vanessa. By the end of the month, the entire staff had settled in, learned their duties, and established interpersonal relationships. Fortunately, fears of romance at work were completely unfounded. Almost all of the adult staff were married, and the maid girls were not interested in the single Alan, the driver, an unloved and withdrawn guy in his 30s. He was also to fulfill the duties of a security guard should the need arise. From one day to the next, the arrival of the family was awaited. Their rooms were ready the day before their arrival. Their assistant Chloe arrived to check on the final preparations. She appeared to be a stern and collected woman whose age was impossible to determine. She was equally likely to be in her 30s or 50s. One day, Vanessa decided to ask Alan a question that had been bothering her for a long time. Alan, please tell me, why do you never call anyone by their middle name, everyone, including yourself? Do you introduce only by first name? It's a habit we picked up while we were living in England. There are no middle names there. Everyone calls each other by first or last name. David and Addison should be called that too, but I told you not to go near them yet. I remember. The arrival of the hosts was not a special event for the staff. The cook cooked lunch, got orders for dinner. Chloe herself gave all the orders, working surprisingly well with Alan. The young maid girl suggested that they might well be having an affair. For dinner, they waited for the arrival of Ciara, the future daughter-in-law of the owners. The girl had been born and raised in Russia, but had spent the last few years in England, where she had met Matthew. The girl's father had a brilliant career, so she was a favorable party. She was to be surprised and charmed. What was Vanessa's surprise when she recognized her former classmate in the girl who arrived, the same one who had made her school years a living hell. Vanessa realized that as soon as Ciara saw her and recognized her, her days in this house would be numbered. So she had to do everything to make sure that the girl, the daughter-in-law of the master's son, did not notice her. Fortunately, the young people just a couple of weeks later went on vacation to one of the resorts. Sitting in the city in the summer was really unbearable. One day, Vanessa came running into one of the rooms, checking the dust on the top shelf of a massive closet. Getting to it with her short stature was impossible. She had to use a small ladder. Engrossed in her work, she didn't immediately notice she wasn't alone in the room. That's why when Matthew, who was watching her, coughed softly, she flinched, lost her balance, and fell down the stairs. Although the stairs were not high, the bruise from the fall could have been quite painful and serious if Matthew hadn't caught her on the fly. Tall and athletic, he picked up the petite girl as if she were nothing. For a few moments he held her in his arms, keeping his admiring gaze on her. It was the first time Vanessa had ever caught such a look of admiration. Since high school, she had been accustomed to thinking of herself as inconspicuous, unassuming, unworthy of attention. In college, the situation was no different. The few boys paid no attention to her, which, combined with her unremarkable appearance, made her insecure. But now, when she was held in the arms of a stunningly handsome, tall, strong, and confident young man, literally eating her up with his eyes, Vanessa felt confident, strong, and charming, as if she were wearing a stunning outfit rather than a modest uniform. "I apologize if I startled you," Matthew said. His voice was like black velvet, enveloping me with softness. Vanessa said, "I'm very grateful to you. Could you put me down on the floor? Someone might come in. It would be a bad situation. I can explain everything to them." Matthew didn't seem to think of obeying her request, as if he realized that what she was saying was the exact opposite of what she wanted. "I have to insist," she said. Putting Vanessa on the floor, he held her in his arms for a few moments, pressing her gently against him and not letting her break free. Unable to tear her gaze away from him, Vanessa admired the perfect appearance of her master's son. Those rare moments when she did get to see him, she thought only of avoiding Kiara's eyes. Looking at her fiancé was something Vanessa dared not think about. But now she stood in the embrace of his strong arms and could think of nothing but how beautiful these moments were. As if with great regret, the young man unclasped his hands, releasing the girl. It should be noted, he did it very timely. Vanessa had no sooner taken a couple of steps toward the door than Lucinda entered the living room through the other entrance. "Honey, there you are. I've been looking all over for you," she said. Hearing the familiar voice behind her, Vanessa hurried to retrace her steps and hide in the nearest room. Closing the door and leaning against it, she tried to calm her frantic heartbeat for a few minutes. She herself couldn't answer exactly what caused it, the unexpected meeting with Kiara or the embrace of her fiancé. "I should be more careful," Vanessa thought. "Today she'll notice me, tomorrow she'll remember me. And the day after tomorrow I'll go back to my small town." Since that day, the girl tried her best not to be seen by any of the owners of the house, but it was much more difficult to command her heart. And is it possible at the age of 18? Vanessa fell in love with the son of the owner and could not command her heart not to long for the handsome young man, despite the fact that she had no chance to reciprocate. The next week passed relatively quietly. Matthew and Ciara went to Peterhof and stayed there for a week at the boyfriend's friend's house. Vanessa got a break and could move around the house more or less calmly and fulfill her duties with full dedication. The girl also saw the owners rarely and hardly ever encountered them in person. Alan, noting the responsibility of the staff, periodically made small changes in the staff or reassignment of duties. For example, Vanessa was assigned to clean the guest rooms and all those rooms where the owners were present. And although in this case the probability of crossing with them increased, the girl did not dare to disobey the manager. To avoid being accused of something terrible, Vanessa decided to tell Alan about what Kiara had done to her. "What was the reason?" the man asked after listening to her story. "I don't know. As far as I could tell, the guys didn't know either. It was just something she didn't like. And then she found all sorts of reasons to hate me more and more." "Well, she's gone now, so you can work in peace." "Well, she's gone. Besides, they're getting married in the fall, and then they're going on a honeymoon, after which she'll start school. She won't have time for you. She probably doesn't remember you." "How long has it been since you've seen her?" "A little over 3 years." At the mention of the upcoming wedding of her lover and former classmate, Vanessa's legs nearly gave out. She didn't think the happy event would happen so soon. "Don't worry. It's good that you warned me. Don't worry. How come you were in the same class as her?" Her dad was from the local government back then and wanted to show how close he was to the people, which didn't stop his daughter from showing us what dirt we are, basically. "Yeah, tough luck for you. But why have I learned to ignore people like Ciara? Like your mom?" The man's voice broke out involuntarily, but he didn't even seem to notice. "How do you know what my mom was like?" Vanessa was surprised. "You told me." It was obvious that Alan was embarrassed and didn't know what to say. Maybe he said at last. The next day, Vanessa met the owner of the house for the first time. She was cleaning the table of photos, humming her mother's favorite song. At that moment, David entered the room. "Jessica," he said involuntarily when he saw the girl. "No, I'm Vanessa. I'm sorry, I didn't know you'd be home at this time. Alan told us to do the cleaning in your absence." "That's okay. Go ahead and work. I won't interrupt you. You just remind me of someone I know." "My mom's name was Jessica," David said unexpectedly. Vanessa continued working. At Alan's insistence, the staff tried not to engage in conversation with the owner. She didn't see the man's face change, as if he had seen a ghost in front of him. The next day, Alan told her that Chloe and the landlady were away on business, and in their absence she would be responsible for cleaning the owner's rooms. Why me? I thought I was only allowed to clean the hallways and the living room. It's David's personal order, Alan replied. It was obvious that he was not happy with this decision. Vanessa was not going to argue with her boss, so she went to clean David's room, assuming that he had already left for work. The huge apartment, furnished in classical style, decorated in gray pastel colors, reminded her of a trip to a museum. She spent a few minutes looking at the rich furnishings, which were different from what was in the rest of the house. That was why she did not immediately notice that her host had not left, but was sitting in a deep armchair by the window, apparently immersed in his thoughts. The girl's first impulse was to go out and return later. But at that moment the man raised his hand, in which he held an old photo from his seat. It was perfectly visible who was depicted on it. The black and white photo showed a happy couple standing, embraced on the seashore. The young man was David, only much younger by about 20 years. And the girl Vanessa recognized her mother. It was the very photo she had found after her mom's funeral. Only in her mom's photo, the man was ripped off. Unable to restrain the first impulse, the girl said, "Where did you get a photo of my mom?" David flinched. He seemed to be so absorbed in his thoughts that he didn't notice her entering. Quickly putting the photo away, he stood up and got ready to leave the room. "You didn't answer," Vanessa stopped him. "You made a mistake. That's me and my wife when we were young. My mom has the exact same photo, only you're torn off. And your wife is the same height as you. That's my petite mom in the photo. How do you know her?" Vanessa looked into the man's eyes. Many times she had read in books that in the eyes you can find the answer to all questions, and she had never understood how that was possible. Now, looking at the pain reflected in them, the girl realized what the man could not say out loud. "You're my father," she said. David took a deep breath and turned away from the window. Apparently it was easier for him to talk that way. "Yes, but I didn't know Jessica had a baby for a long time. When we broke up, I had Alan keep an eye on her, watch her from afar, help her if she needed it. A year later, however, he told me he'd met Jessica. She absolutely refused any help or any mention of me at all. It turns out he didn't stop looking after you. When you were orphaned, he was the one who made sure you were placed in our home. And you didn't know about this?" "No, not until yesterday. He wanted to keep you close so you wouldn't get into trouble. He hoped I wouldn't recognize you. Basically, he had the right idea. We weren't planning on living in this house for long. The chances of us crossing paths were minimal. But why did you and Mom break up? Do you have any idea? I had a family, a kid, Jessica. And Jessica was just a temporary fling. A distraction from the family routine," the girl finished harshly. "No, you're wrong," David objected. "She was never just an infatuation for me. Not her. She and I met here in Chicago. She was visiting the museum, and I had business nearby. We bumped into each other, got to talking. Then walked around the city until midnight. I just lost my head so much that I sent my family overseas and flew on vacation with Jessica. She was so sweet, so pure, so light, so trusting. I was serious about divorcing Addison and marrying your mom. What stopped you from doing that?" "My father. When he found out what I was doing, he was quick to bring me back down to earth. Our business was completely dependent on Addison's father. If I'd left her, my father-in-law would have left us with nothing, at best. At worst, we'd be found somewhere out of town. And it wasn't just my life I was risking. Jessica wouldn't have survived either. I couldn't lie any further, so I told the truth. She was broken and crushed. In the end, she asked me to leave her and never come into her life again. I couldn't just let her disappear. I offered to move to Chicago so I could see her once in a while." "And what did she do? Did you know your mother well?" "She refused," Vanessa replied. "Of course she did. I haven't seen her since, but my father asked Alan to keep an eye on her. Well, you know the rest. I saw the deed to the apartment, so Alan gave it to me. I didn't realize who he was at the time. I see now. Maybe he didn't tell me about it. I didn't know about you until yesterday. I mean, the best person to ask is Alan, I guess. I was having a hard time with our breakup. I wanted to go to her and apologize, but suddenly I got the news that Matthew was very ill. I got on the same flight to see him. My father did everything he could to save Matthew, and I came back as late as possible. When I got back, Alan said Jessica was missing, and he couldn't find any trace of her. That's probably when you showed up, and that's how he kept you from me. Maybe he did the right thing. Knowing that my beloved had a child with me, I could hardly resist leaving everything for you. But you had a child in your family too. Yes, I did, David said absently, and turned back to the window. Vanessa decided that the conversation was over and left the room quietly. As she was about to close the door, she realized and asked, "Can I continue working here?" "I won't say anything to anyone, I promise." "You're just like your mother." "You're not a mercenary," David replied. "I don't know what you mean." "Of course you can stay, but promise not to tell anyone about anything. If I may, it's going to be hard to explain now." Back in her room, Vanessa took a long time to come to her senses. The man she had never dreamed of meeting turned out to be her master, the owner of a huge fortune and family. Vanessa tried not to think about it at all. After all, now it turned out that she had fallen in love with her own brother for the first time. Now her love was not only unrequited, hopeless, but also criminal. Incestuous. She had to forbid herself to even think about it. The ideal would be to quit this house and forget this family like a bad dream. About demanding something from her father, the girl did not even think about it. After sitting in the room for about half an hour, Vanessa decided to find Alan and consult with him. Besides, she wanted to question him, because he almost certainly knew she was the owner's daughter when he invited her to work in his house. Besides, she hadn't fulfilled her duties, and she was used to working responsibly. Right now, though, the thing she wanted most was to pack her things and leave for her hometown. Probably my mother also decided almost 20 years ago, when she refused all the benefits offered by my father, refused to destroy his family. Although she herself, with great difficulty, was able to raise her daughter on her feet. Maybe that's why she left life so early? There was a knock at the door. Vanessa realized she'd been in the room for quite some time. Did they notice her absence? Alan was at the door. "We need to talk," he said, and gestured for her to follow him. Vanessa thought it would be about her and the fact that she had learned the secret of her birth. However, judging by how tense and even angry the man was, the girl guessed that something similar had happened. "What do you think you're doing?" Alan asked. "What are you talking about?" Vanessa feigned innocence. "And pretending to be an innocent fool. And pretending to be an innocent fool. She's making a spectacle of herself here, saying that Ciara might slander you, and she's hanging herself around Matthew's neck." "I didn't hang myself. I fell down the stairs, he caught me. And at 12 this afternoon, I've been bombarded with questions about who he is and where he's from. I don't know where he is or how he's acting. I was checking the dust in the closet. Standing on the stairs, he quietly walked in. I lost my balance, almost fell. That's the whole story of our interaction. I swear to you. Learn, girl. I won't allow you to interfere in the lives of family members." "You won't? Then why did you bring me here? Or are you telling me you didn't know who the owner was? Or didn't you buy my mom an apartment when I was born? Didn't you look after her? You didn't find me?" "It doesn't matter. I just have one question for you. Why?" Alan didn't seem to be so much taken aback by the news as by the fierce intensity with which she spoke. "How do you know everything?" he wondered. "You probably haven't noticed that I look remarkably like my mother, but my father did. Besides, I saw a photo of them together, so there's no reason for me to be messing around with my own brother." Still not recovered, the man sat down and was silent for a few minutes, as if gathering his thoughts and choosing words. Finally, he spoke. "Yes, I did buy the apartment for Jessica, because David had done her an injustice. He had no right to leave her like that, like a tired toy. Not her. Pride wouldn't let her tell him about the baby. Pride wouldn't let her ask for money to support her. That's why I didn't tell him anything about you. He just had no right to know that he had a child. His baby is his own. His own. But he'd already had Matthew by then. Yeah, another baby. I fell in love with her, and I wanted her to be my wife. I'd raise you like a daughter, take care of you and mommy. But she loved your father and chose him again. Again. Don't you think there's too much you're leaving out?" Vanessa asked. I don't need the whole truth. It doesn't concern me. Why did you bring me here? I wanted to keep you under supervision. I didn't think he'd recognize you. I didn't think he'd recognize you, that Matthew would be interested in you. You're just a child. You're not old enough to live on your own. That's why I found you, invited you to work here. I can't stay here anymore, Vanessa said. I'm sorry, but it's beyond me. Why not? What's stopping you? Did David ask you to do this? No, he asked me not to tell anyone yet. So stay here for now. I'll decide what's best. Okay. While Vanessa was thinking of an answer, Alan got a call. What? Where is he? Is he alive? What hospital is he in? The man exclaimed. A moment later, he sprinted out of the room and rushed toward the service exit. Vanessa remained, not realizing what had happened. By late afternoon, it was learned that Matthew, while riding out of town in an automobile, had been involved in an accident. The likelihood that he would be alive was minimal. From the news, Vanessa could hardly stand on her feet. David rushed to see his son at the hospital. Alan was there too. The others had to wait to see if the young man would survive the night. By morning, it was reported that the boy needed a blood transfusion. And a few hours later, it became known that the injuries were much more serious than the doctors had decided the day before. A lot of blood was needed. In addition, the guy had a rather rare group, the fourth negative. In such a situation, the ideal donor could be someone close to him. Vanessa's first impulse was to offer herself as a donor, but her Rh factor was positive. She was surprised by this. She had known since high school that children inherited their father's Rh factor, so it had to be the same for her and Matthew. Meanwhile, the search for a suitable donor was unsuccessful, and time was literally counting by minutes. Close relatives and all those who were in the hospital at the time were checked for a match. Unexpectedly, Alan turned out to be a suitable donor candidate. No one paid any attention to it at the time. Everyone was alarmed by the guy's condition and was glad that he would live. Recovery took quite a long time. The young and healthy body was taking its toll despite the serious injuries. Chiara was sent back to England by her father so as not to upset her. Besides, the school year was starting and the girl was just beginning her studies. The wedding due to the accident had to be postponed. It seemed that neither the bride nor the groom was particularly upset by this news. At the end of August, Matthew was discharged from the hospital. Vanessa, who all this time tried not to show her father in front of her eyes and not to remember about her inappropriate feelings for her brother, realized that her idea to go home at the beginning of summer was the most reasonable. It turned out that Alan had interrogated her on the day of the accident for a reason. Matthew had shared his plans for Vanessa with him. The guy really fell in love and planned to leave the bride imposed by her father. He was not at all embarrassed by the fact that his beloved was a maid and that his father would be furious when he found out about everything. He decided to share his plans with someone he had grown accustomed to trusting since childhood. Uncle Elananu, his father's assistant and longtime friend, had actually raised the boy. In many ways, Matthew trusted him much more, so he decided to confide his plans for his upcoming marriage to him as well. Trust him, and ask for advice. Alan realized that the boy's youth and inexperience could ruin not only his life and career, but also hurt his father. In his first impulse, Alan wanted to send Vanessa back to her hometown. His plans were thwarted by an accident, and then he realized that he was doing to Matthew exactly the same thing his father had once done to David when he forced him to leave Jessica. However, he wasn't going to let their relationship go as far. Another naive, jilted girl and another unhappy child. No, that wasn't what Alan was going to allow. He made the decision to give them time to work things out. Maybe this relationship would work itself out. Or maybe there was no love affair. Just a desire to go against his father's plans. So he decided not to get involved. Besides, it had been over 2 months, and the infatuation with the girl might have worn off in the young man's head. Unfortunately for him, Matthew not only did not forget about his infatuation with the young maid, but from the first day he decided to take active steps. And the first step was a huge bouquet, which Vanessa found under her door the next morning. There was no envelope with an indication of the giver, but it was not required. There were, and could be, no options. Vanessa decided to nip his advances in the bud. Entering the young man's room, she caught him warming up. After a month of forced bed rest and recovery from fractures, the guy decided to make up for lost time. His leg was still in a cast after a bad fracture, but he had already asked to have arm exercisers installed in the room. The moment Vanessa walked in, he was working out while listening to music through headphones. He couldn't hear her enter, and she froze, seeing him so perfect, so athletic. Apollo in a cast. Considering that she'd hardly had relationships or attention from guys before, she wanted to give in to his advances, if only for a short time, and then tell him everything, or silently disappear and live the rest of her life in happy memories. She must have been too deep in thought, because Matthew had noticed her presence and was saying something to her. I'm glad Vanessa seemed to have listened to the most important part of the conversation, considering how wide and happy the guy was smiling. I'm sorry, I was listening. What were you talking about? I was saying that I'm going to break up with her today and tell my dad. Tell him what? I guess I hit my head a little, Matthew joked. I couldn't help it, and I can hear you. I can't understand why you make decisions that affect me without asking my opinion. I thought you liked me too. There's a very, very, very big difference between liking you and running to the ends of the earth with you. But for example, you and I haven't met. I'm a maid. You're a millionaire's son. I'm a college graduate. You're a prestigious foreign university. You're rich and famous, I'm not. I wanted to finish, but she didn't dare. I don't see the problem. We've got plenty of time to get to know each other. How old are you? 19 soon. Great. Plenty of time to get a decent education. It's not like I'm dragging you to the wedding on your doorstep like Ciara and I did. Let's just be around each other and get to know each other. I like you a lot, and I can't believe you don't feel the same way about me. With those words, Matthew reached out his arms to her and gently pulled her to him. She should have resisted, should have turned away, should have pulled away and pushed him away. Great came a familiar voice. I'm gone for a couple weeks, and he's already smirking. With some girl. A furious Ciara stood in the doorway, glaring at the couple. Ciara, what are you doing here? Matthew didn't seem bothered by the fact that he was kissing another girl in front of his fiancée. He didn't even open his arms, still holding Vanessa to his chest. The same ones you did. You're so shameless. Now let her go. I don't know who you're hugging. It would have been nice if she was a famous model. Stop, Ciara shouted, yanking Vanessa's arm away from Matthew. I can't believe it. The maid. What are you doing here anyway? You haven't changed a bit. You're still the same ugly gray mouse. Ciara, stop it. Matthew stood up for Vanessa, not surprised that the girls knew each other. What are you, silent? Did you choke on your tongue as usual? What brings you here? Are you trying to get back at me? You sneak into my fiancé's house and get into bed with him. Don't get your hopes up, you won't get him. Ciara, you're wrong, Vanessa tried to justify herself. I took a job in this house, not knowing that it would soon be yours. I came to Matthew's room to see if he needed anything cleaned or brought in, and I accidentally fell on his lips. And he asked me to help him up out of his chair. I did, Ciara finished. You've never been good at lying, but now you decided to try. Well, that's a ridiculous excuse to fall for. Anyway, she turned to her fiancé. It's going to stop today, or else, well, she knows it will be otherwise. With that, the girl left the room, slamming the door so that a painting fell from the wall. The glass shattered into several dozen pieces, one of which bounced off and hurt Matthew's hand. Damn, what a fury. He laughed, trying to pull the shard out of the wound. Let me help, Vanessa said on impulse. But after a couple of minutes, Vanessa regretted it, because she found herself pressed against the door. The young man, not waiting for her to object, kissed her. Her legs gave out and she would have fallen if he hadn't put his arms around her. Gathering her will in a fist, she managed to pull away and say, "Don't ever do that again." But you liked it, didn't you? The guy grinned and reached for her for another kiss. This time Vanessa managed to dodge. I have to clean this place up, she said, ducking out the door and trying to hide in her room as quickly as possible. After catching her breath, she went back to the kitchen, grabbed a dustpan and broom, and headed for Matthew's room. This time he was fully dressed and sitting in front of the TV. Calm down? Let's continue. I'm here to clean up the glass, Vanessa said. I hope you won't hurt your hand with anything else. Not anymore. But you didn't remove that shard from me either. If you behave like this, it'll stay in your hand, and you'll let it, Matthew said mockingly. And if it starts to get blood poisoning and I die without glory or honor? The young man's voice was enveloping and made him think of anything but work. No, I can't let David get blood poisoning, Vanessa said. No, you can't. He was the only one with the right blood. He's had a lot of it pumped out of him. That's right. That's the only thing worth living for. I'll appreciate him even more now. He's been my best and truest friend before, and now we're of the same blood. You were the same blood before. No one else had such a rare bloodline. Not even your parents, Vanessa blurted out. She was about to bite her tongue off for that last sentence, because Matthew clung to her like a bulldog. What's weird, your parents don't have a band like mine. I misspoke. And anyway, I have to go. Or you're not going anywhere until you explain what you meant. Matthew's tone went from playful to affectionate to categorical, unapologetic. I didn't mean anything. Except that children most often inherit their parents' RH factor, Vanessa said hastily. If I remember my biology course well. If a child has it negative, it means that he took it from his parents or one of them. So if my parents have it positive and I have it negative, I'm a foundling? No, why? Maybe your father's RH factor is positive. Usually children inherit it from their father. But I'm not sure, I don't know. We should go to the hospital, she suggested. The boy seemed to understand everything and began to reason out loud. Alan's father is an acquaintance from childhood. They were friends. Alan devoted his whole life to sports, and his father went into business. When he was able to make good money, he invited Alan to become a personal security guard. Gradually, he took on other responsibilities such as running the house. Always together, always there for each other. Never a quarrel. And now Alan becomes the only suitable donor for me. Well, maybe you don't know and someone else helped? Vanessa suggested. There are all sorts of reasons why a person can't be a donor illnesses. For example, maybe your mom with the same rhesus. Vanessa regretted 100 times that she had voiced her doubts aloud. No, only Alan's Matthew cut her off. He seemed oblivious to the fact that Vanessa was still in the room. He gestured toward the door, signaling that she should leave the room. He picked up the phone from the table and dialed a familiar number. You can come to my room. It's an emergency. The guy shouted after he heard an attempted objection. Going downstairs, Vanessa ran into Alan on the stairs, who was walking with quick steps towards Matthew's room. Finishing her business, the girl returned to her room and began packing. It was naive to believe that she was in a position to fight this. It had some incomprehensible magical power over her, making her lose her will and her mind. The consequences could be most unpredictable and terrible. So she should have left the house, returned to her own place, and thought about how to live further, how and what to earn money for. About demanding from her father financial help or his participation in her life. The girl did not even think about it. She wanted to forget this page of her life. No sooner had she packed her things than the phone rang. It was Alan. He asked her to come up to Matthew's room. His voice was calm but strange. I told you not to go where you don't belong. Alan greeted her with those words as soon as she could enter. Wait, don't scare her before she's ready. Maybe things can still work out very well. Matthew cheered up after talking to Alan, as if he had heard great news. I don't understand what's going on, Vanessa said. Alan, I wanted to ask you to pay me back. I can't stay here any longer. Of course, you've made a mess, and you're in the bushes. No, darling, you're not going to do it now. No, dear, you're not going anywhere now, Alan grinned. Matthew tried to grab the girl's hand. The attempt, however, was unsuccessful, and he fell back onto the bed where he had been sitting. Vanessa instinctively rushed over to him for support. I told you she loves me too, Matthew laughed, standing up easily and hugging the girl. I see that history is repeating itself again. And your father will not be happy about this news. Alan shook his head. Not to mention your fiancée and her father. My fiancée is in front of you, Matthew objected. Will someone please explain to me what's even going on here? Vanessa pulled out of Matthew's embrace. She looked from one to the other, trying to figure out what they were hiding. Alan, tell me. She knows half of this terrible secret anyway. Besides, she thinks she's in love with her brother. And don't argue, I can see that you like me, the guy said when the girl tried to get indignant. Judy, sit down. This is going to be a long conversation, Alan said. David and I grew up in the same neighborhood. Ever since kindergarten, we've done every mischief together. Never fought, always helping each other out. We lived like that for almost 10 years until a military family moved in next door. The incoming officer and his wife had a beautiful daughter, Addison. As you can imagine, that's Matthew's mom. We were both crazy about her, chasing her around like puppies. And we weren't the only ones. She was the star of the school within a year. Nobody even noticed her at first. And then we graduated and moved away. And we met at the New Year's Eve ball at school, not knowing what David had charmed her with. We had an affair. But I didn't want to give up either, even though I couldn't stand in the way of their happiness. So I finally confessed everything to her and gave her a choice. She chose David? Vanessa asked. No, she did what a real woman would do. She stayed with one man and got pregnant by another, Matthew said angrily. Don't you dare say that. It's your mother. Alan almost punched the young man in the face. Matthew, stop it. Alan, what happened next? Tell me. As crude as it sounds, Matthew expressed the essence of what happened, Alan said. She did choose David, and she gave me a generous gift that I couldn't have hoped for on the last night. Who would have thought that was the night she'd get pregnant? Yeah. So that's why you have the same blood type? Vanessa guessed. Yeah, I've suspected that for a long time, Matthew said. I look a lot like you. The same habits. My father and I were always like strangers. When did you find out that Addison's baby was your son? When she and David set a wedding date, I decided to leave. Stay out of the way. I signed a contract and joined the army. Came back almost 6 years after I was wounded. No family, no money. David found me and invited me to stay with him. The first time I saw Matthew, I knew he was my son. I don't know how the others didn't see it. That's around the time David met Jessica. I thought to myself, this is my chance. Jessica's gonna leave, and I'm gonna marry Addison. And we'll all be happy, Alan said. Yeah, happy, Matthew queried. Did you forget that in the world of money, no one's happy? Yeah, you're right. And Addison had made it clear to me that she didn't want me. To be honest, I'd grown cold to her during the separation. So I helped David cover up the whole Jessica thing. I bought her an apartment while I looked after her. You fell in love? Vanessa asked. You sure did. We even have the same taste in women. Only Jessica remained faithful to her first, and only loved for the rest of her life. Yeah, Mom never looked at another man after that, Matthew confirmed. Well, it was a story that was gradually forgotten. David took his family abroad. I went with them. I lived in 2 countries. And when Jessica was gone, I decided to move Vanessa closer to me so I could keep an eye on her. Addison and his son decided to come back to America too? Vanessa guessed. And then you know the rest, my friends. I don't know how you fell in love, but this guy interrogated me today. I had to come clean. So you're Matthew's father? Vanessa asked. Does David know? No, I don't think so. Anyway, we've never talked about it. Yeah, it's a real passion, Vanessa shook her head. It's like a movie. It's better than that, Matthew grinned. Now, I don't know if my alleged father will send me away and bequeath all his millions to you. Matthew, stop it. It's not funny. That's not funny. It's only fair, really. And I won't have to marry you or your daughter. I mean, he doesn't need me to make family connections with his business partners. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. Hey, I'm a good sport about this. You're going to be a rich heiress, and I'm going to get you again. Then I'll have the money again. Matthew seemed to be enjoying the situation. I wouldn't be so happy if I were you, Vanessa said. I think we should keep it a secret. At least for now, Alan said. I mean, Dad, are you crazy? Where's the secrecy going to go from here? So for a quarter of a century, everyone was silent. And it's not like David hadn't guessed anything. I suggest we get everyone together at the family council and confess everything. Have a night of revelations, Matthew suggested. It turns out that both parents were dishonest, both cheated and both had children on the side. Yourself? Alan questioned. But in fact, I'm an illegitimate child too. I'm not sure everyone will be as thrilled, Vanessa replied. I'm sure we can't keep quiet, Matthew insisted. Let's do it this way. I'll tell David myself. And then we'll think about it. The three of them went about their business. And not knowing that the capricious and resentful Ciara had already complained to her father about her fiancé Matthew. The man had never been known for his gentle nature, being resentful and suspicious. The fact that his potential partner couldn't keep his son in line meant that he would be just as soft in business, and he didn't want to do business with such people. By the time Alan had persuaded Matthew and Vanessa to keep quiet and not tell anyone what they'd learned, Ciara's father had already ordered the withdrawal of his investments in all of David's projects. Breaking up the deals threatened to lose large sums of money. Not getting a clear answer from his subordinates, David went home in a frenzy to seek an answer from his son. And the first person he saw in Matthew's room was his newfound daughter Vanessa in his son's arms. How dare you? David screamed at Vanessa. Did you purposely show up to destroy my family? I will crush you to dust. And you, puppy, he said to Matthew, get dressed immediately and go to your fiancée. I don't care how, but you will beg her forgiveness. You'll restore the engagement. Her father will get his money back, invested in my business. And I'll deal with you later, he said to Vanessa. I wouldn't be in such a hurry, Matthew replied. Besides, you can't tell me what to do. I'm not even your subordinate, let alone anything more. What did you say? David was outraged. I'll take everything away from you. You'll forget what expensive cars and resorts look like, where you used to spend my money. I'm scared, Matthew replied calmly. I'm already educated. Thank you, I'm sure, but you can't take it away. But you can't take it away from me. I'll take care of the rest. You've never earned a penny in your life. You've never earned a penny in your life. Now you're showing a little attitude, David continued to shout. I'm a grown man. As soon as I'm in shape, I'll leave your apartment. What's the holdup? I can have the room today. I think it's rightfully yours for your child to occupy. Yes, Dad, Matthew said calmly. Or did you think that your little secret of having a daughter out of wedlock would remain a secret? David turned pale and sat back in his chair. He seemed suddenly short of breath. What makes you think that? He hissed. Oh, don't say that. I have the courage to confess. And bonus, you get one more little secret. But just in case you think I'm hugging my own sister, Matthew. What are you talking about? David shook his head. Yeah, so he didn't know. Well, Alan wanted to tell you, but I beat him to it. Tell me what? Dad, have you known this your whole life? Matthew stared at his father. Didn't you ever see anything in me in common with him? Even I had my doubts as a child, when he and I had common tastes and interests. That's impossible. Addison was faithful to me, David said stubbornly. By and large, yes. They had a little adventure with your friend before you got married. That's why he moved away, so that he wouldn't interfere with your happiness. You're wrong about what? That I'm his son? Matthew asked. I assure you I only found out today. Or rather, I guessed it, thanks to your clever and attentive daughter Vanessa. It was in her bright head came the idea that the parents with a positive Rh factor, having the second type of blood, cannot have a child with the fourth negative. Genetics is a scary, stubborn, and surprisingly accurate in such matters. I checked. Vanessa was right. The fact that Alan was the only suitable donor only made her suspicious. And you should have warned us all, Matthew continued wryly. Why? Because you should have been in school, not skipping classes. Vanessa looked at Matthew and couldn't believe her own eyes. In just one morning, he had gone from a sweet and handsome boy to a tough and sarcastic one. He seemed to enjoy seeing the effect his words had on David. Meanwhile, the man was getting worse as he unbuttoned his shirt collar and loosened the knot of his tie. From the change in his complexion, his condition was alarming. "Matthew, stop it," Vanessa exclaimed. "You can see he needs help." Grabbing the phone, she called an ambulance. Then she called Alan and David's driver. Together, they managed to carefully take the man downstairs to the exit, where the ambulance was already arriving. The girl decided to accompany her newfound father to the hospital. She instructed Alan to talk to Matthew so he wouldn't do anything stupid again. David was taken to the hospital just in time. On the background of high blood pressure and stress, he had a stroke. Fortunately, there were doctors nearby, which meant that it was hoped that the consequences would not be so devastating. The man stayed in hospital for about 2 weeks, after which there was a long period of rehabilitation. Vanessa lived between the hospital and home. Even though her father had received excellent care at the expensive hospital, she was terrified to even imagine that she could lose her last loved one, barely finding him. She'd only crossed paths with Matthew a couple times in all this time. He, too, seemed to have lost interest in her. As soon as the cast was removed from her leg, Matthew moved out of the house without telling her where he was going. Before he left, he contacted his mother, who was in Los Angeles, and warned her that she shouldn't show up at their new home yet, for her father had found out her little secret. "Don't feel bad about it," Addison replied. "He has one of his own." Suddenly, his illegitimate daughter, Ciara, had turned up and was now staying in his bed. He's probably already made her his sole heir. "So you have no business in LA," Matthew said sharply. "What daughter? What are you talking about?" "Matthew, your life with him has never been perfect," Addison replied. "So I don't think you're surprised by this news. Besides, he's a man, and men have a tendency to have affairs on the side. At least, I understand him. Besides, it's not your place to complain about him." "Hey, Shem. How's he doing?" "He'll live. They got him to the hospital on time, and he's got the best doctors in the world." "Have you been to see him?" "No, why?" "As it turns out, I'm nothing to him now." "He raised you? Even if you didn't know he wasn't your father, he put all his heart, soul, love, and a lot of money into you." "Is that what you're saying?" "That too. How can you be so callous?" "I'm not callous. I'm sober. There's no point in me staying there now, which is why I'm calling you so you don't accidentally show up. I'm on the next flight out. It's a shame your health and the lives of your family don't mean anything to you. I'm sorry. In spite of everything, your father and I have been together for over 20 years. It's up to you. Don't be surprised to find a new mistress at home. Let me handle this." The next day, the woman was in New York. She decided to come home later and went to the hospital right after the airport. Her husband's condition was indeed quite satisfactory. Still, a healthy and fairly young body was able to cope with such a test. In the corridor, Addison met Vanessa. Surprisingly, the girl seemed completely different from how her son had presented her. Even though they had a romantic relationship looming, David was resting after his treatments, so the woman decided to ask Vanessa about him. Vanessa talked about David's well-being and the doctor's prognosis. Somehow, imperceptibly, the conversation turned to who Vanessa really was. The girl told how she herself had found out that her master was her father. How Matthew had guessed that Alan was his father. In fact, they hadn't noticed how they had talked for hours, sitting in the quiet hospital cafe. After talking to the girl, Addison went to her husband's room and Vanessa went home. She was to give the order to prepare a room for the mistress. Lately, she had taken over the housekeeper's duties and was doing a fine job with them. Alan was away on a business trip. Addison came home in the evening and was pleasantly surprised to see that they had prepared for her arrival. She said that they had discussed things with her husband calmly without mutual complaints or recriminations. In the end, they came to the conclusion that they would keep the family together, because many years had passed since their transgressions. Matthew David promised to help with his own business, and Vanessa to send to study. Now it was their mutual children. Besides, Vanessa had no one else but them. Sometimes life presents us with serious tests of willpower, kindness, loyalty, humanity. It is important not only to deal with the problem, but also to understand and learn the lesson. And the most important thing is to remain human in any situation. Vanessa was lucky. Life compensated her for the most difficult loss with several new acquisitions: family, prospects, opportunities, study. And although no one and nothing could replace her mother, now she could rely on her father.